Picture a city rising not from stone or soil, but from the shimmering surface of a lake, its streets made of water, its foundations floating on ancient ingenuity. For thousands of years, human beings did not just live near water, they built upon it, creating thriving civilizations that defied the very ground beneath our feet. These were not myths or isolated experiments. They were sophisticated societies, from the vast floating gardens of the Aztec capital to the reed islands of South America, each one a testament to humanity's relentless drive to adapt, innovate, and reimagine what's possible. Why would cultures choose water over solid land? What compelled them to turn lakes into neighborhoods and rivers into highways? The answers are as deep and complex as the waters they built upon. Some sought protection from invaders or predators. Others harnessed the rich resources of aquatic environments, fish, fertile silt, natural transportation routes. But beyond survival, these floating cities reveal something profound about the human spirit. A desire to live in harmony with nature, to shape our world without dominating it, and to create beauty and order in the most unexpected places. In this video, we're setting out on a journey across time and continents to rediscover these lost worlds. We'll walk the canals of Tenochtitlan, stand on the woven islands of Lake Titicaca, and delve into the stilt villages that once dotted European lakes. We'll uncover how they were built, why they flourished, and how so many vanished beneath the waves of time, war, or environmental change. Most importantly, we'll ask what their stories can teach us today, in an era of rising seas and climate uncertainty, about resilience, creativity, and what it means to build a future in balance with water. This is more than history, it's a mirror to our own potential. So come with us and let's dive deep into the secrets of the cities that floated. Long before the grand floating cities of empires, our ancestors were already mastering the art of living on water. To understand the true dawn of aquatic architecture, we must travel back over 5,000 years to the misty lakes and lochs of Scotland and Ireland. Here, in the Neolithic period, communities began constructing remarkable artificial islands known as crannogs. These were not simple rafts, they were sophisticated, permanent settlements built from layers of timber, stone, and earth, painstakingly piled onto lakebeds to create stable foundations that rose above the water's surface. Imagine the sight, a small, circular island, perhaps connected to the shore by a narrow, hidden causeway or accessible only by boat, holding a sturdy wooden roundhouse at its center. The construction itself was a monumental feat of early engineering. Teams would drive sharpened wooden piles deep into the soft lake bottom to create a circular retaining wall. Then they would fill this enclosed space with countless tons of rock, brushwood, and clay, layer upon layer, until a stable island emerged from the water. This process required not just immense labor, but a profound understanding of materials and buoyancy, a collective effort that speaks volumes about the social organization of these early peoples. So why go to all this trouble? As archaeologist Dr. Anne Crone, who has studied these sites for decades, points out, the advantages were numerous. A crannog was a fortress. It offered unparalleled protection from predators, both animal and human. The surrounding water acted as a natural moat, deterring rival groups and providing the inhabitants with precious time to prepare a defense or simply remain hidden. But it was far more than just a defensive stronghold. These locations were chosen for their incredible access to resources. The wetlands were rich ecosystems teeming with fish, waterfowl, and edible plants. Living directly on the water turned a home into a permanent hunting and fishing platform. the inhabitants could literally drop a line from their doorstep. Beyond the purely practical, we must also consider the symbolic weight of choosing to build on water. For these ancient communities, water was likely not just a resource but a powerful spiritual element, a boundary between the everyday world and the other world, a source of life and mystery. By building their homes upon it, they may have been placing themselves at the very center of this cosmic balance, demonstrating a form of mastery over the elements that was both physical and deeply spiritual. These primordial habitats reveal a fundamental truth about humanity. Our drive to adapt and innovate is matched by a deep desire to coexist with the natural world, even to draw power from it. The crannog builders were the true pioneers, their layered islands of timber and stone laying the essential groundwork for every floating city and stilt village that would follow in the millennia to come. But the ambition of the Aztecs did not stop at defense and agriculture. To truly grasp the genius of Tenochtitlan, one must understand its intricate water management systems, which were nothing short of revolutionary. The city existed in a basin surrounded by mountains, and the lake's brackish waters were prone to flooding and salinity. The Aztec engineers tackled this with a sophistication that rivals modern civil engineering. They constructed a massive dike system stretching for miles that served a dual purpose. It held back the fresh water from the surrounding springs and rivers, creating a vast, controlled reservoir around the city, while also separating it from the saltier waters of Lake Texcoco. This delicate balance ensured a steady supply of fresh water for the population's needs and for the incredibly productive Chinampas. Furthermore, they built aqueducts, like the one from Chapultepec Hill, to deliver this precious fresh water directly into the heart of the city. The layout itself was a masterclass in urban design. A grid of canals functioned as waterways for canoes, the primary mode of transport for people and goods, while broad causeways connected the island city to the mainland, with removable bridges that could isolate Tenochtitlan in times of threat. At the center of this aquatic web stood the Templo Mayor, the Great Pyramid, a spiritual and geographical anchor from which the city radiated outward. This was not a haphazard settlement. It was a meticulously planned metropolis where water was not an obstacle to be overcome but a resource to be harnessed, integrated into every facet of life from commerce to ceremony. The Spanish conquistadors, upon their arrival in 1519, were utterly astounded. Soldiers like Bernal Diaz del Castillo wrote in their chronicles of seeing towers and temples rising from the water, comparing it to the enchantments found in fantastical stories. They described a city more orderly, more beautiful, and more grand than any they had seen in Europe. The great market of Tlatelolco, a district within Tenochtitlan, throbbed with activity, where tens of thousands of people gathered daily to trade everything from jade and gold to feathers and cocoa beans, all arriving and departing via the city's liquid highways. This vibrant, complex society, however, would soon face its end. The very element that gave it life water would be used against it. During the final, brutal siege of 1521, the Spanish and their indigenous allies systematically destroyed the aqueducts and dikes, cutting off the fresh water and flooding the city with the toxic, salty water of the main lake. The conquistadors, unable to comprehend the sophisticated equilibrium of the Aztec ecosystem, saw the lakes not as a foundation for civilization, but as a swamp to be drained. In the centuries that followed, the Spanish colonists methodically filled in the canals and lakes, superimposing their own grid of streets and squares upon the ruins, burying the aquatic marvel of Tenochtitlan beneath what is now Mexico City. The profound irony is staggering. A culture that had mastered its aqueous environment for centuries was ultimately defeated by invaders whose solution was to simply erase that environment entirely. The story of Tenochtitlan is a powerful and poignant lesson. It shows us that the most advanced urban design is one that works in concert with nature, not against it. The Chinampa system, with its incredible productivity and sustainability, is now being studied by modern agronomists as a model for future food security. The city's fate, however, stands as an eternal warning about the vulnerability of even the most resilient systems to short-sighted conquest and the brute force of an incompatible worldview. Now let's travel from the highlands of Mesoamerica to the vibrant waterways of Southeast Asia, where life has been shaped not just by water, but by its dramatic seasonal pulse. Here, along the vast expanse of Cambodia's Tonle Sap Lake and the intricate river networks of Vietnam and Thailand, communities have perfected a way of life that literally rises and falls with the rhythm of nature. The Tonle Sap, often called the beating heart of Cambodia, undergoes an incredible transformation each year. During the dry season, it's a relatively modest body of water. But when the monsoon rains arrive, the mighty Mekong River swells to such a degree that it actually reverses the flow of the Tonle Sap River, causing the lake to expand its surface area by more than 5 times, flooding the surrounding forest plains. It is in this dynamic, ever-changing environment that the stilt villages have flourished for centuries. Homes here are not merely built near the water, they are engineered to exist in a symbiotic relationship with it. Villages like Kampong Phluk and Chong Nis are architectural marvels, with houses perched on incredibly tall, sturdy wooden poles, some reaching heights of 10 meters or more. These are not temporary shelters but permanent, multi-generational homes, complete with schools, temples, and bustling markets, all suspended above the water. The construction techniques are a testament to generations of accumulated wisdom. The primary materials are those provided by the surrounding environment, resilient hardwoods like ironwood or bamboo for the structural frames, woven thatch from nipa palm or grass for the roofs and walls. The poles are driven deep into the lake or riverbed, often reinforced with cross-bracing to withstand not just the weight of the structure, but also the strong currents and winds of the monsoon season. There is no single blueprint. The design varies from region to region, adapted to local conditions, but the principle remains the same: to create a stable, secure platform that elevates daily life above the floodwaters. Anthropologist Dr. Likthina Chow Pech Olia emphasizes that this is far more than a practical adaptation. It is the foundation of a unique cultural identity. The entire rhythm of life, from economic activities to social rituals and spiritual beliefs, is synchronized with the aquatic cycle. During the wet season, when the water is high, the village becomes a hub of fishing activity. Boats are the primary mode of transport, gliding between houses where children play and neighbors converse. The flooded forests become incredibly fertile fishing grounds, providing a bounty that sustains the community and fuels a significant part of Cambodia's protein intake. As the waters recede in the dry season, a different phase begins. The exposed, nutrient-rich sediment around the stilt houses becomes ideal for recession agriculture, where families might grow quick-yielding crops like melons or cucumbers. The village, once a floating community, now stands on tall legs above dry ground, connected by ladders to the earth below. This deep, intimate knowledge of the ecosystem means that the people can read the water's signals, predicting the intensity of the coming flood or the potential of the next harvest. Their calendar, their economy, and their spirituality are all woven into this relationship with the water. Yet this ancient harmony is now facing unprecedented threats. Climate change is disrupting the delicate seasonal patterns upon which this entire way of life depends. More erratic monsoons can lead to devastatingly high floods that overwhelm even the tallest stilt houses, or shockingly low water levels that cripple the fishing industry and strand communities in thick, difficult-to-navigate mud. Furthermore, large-scale development projects, including upstream dams on the Mekong, are trapping silt and altering the natural flood pulse, jeopardizing the very ecological foundation of the lake. Deforestation reduces the water-holding capacity of the land, exacerbating both floods and droughts. These pressures are forcing many younger generations to abandon traditional lives for opportunities in cities, risking the loss of this invaluable cultural knowledge. This brings us to a crucial and timely question. As the world grapples with rising sea levels and increased coastal flooding, could the ancient wisdom of these stilt villages offer a blueprint for modern resilience? The answer is a resounding yes, and architects and planners are already taking note. The principles are sound: building with flexibility, using elevated structures, and designing communities to work with water rather than constantly fighting against it. Modern adaptations might use concrete and steel instead of wood and thatch, but the core concept remains. In places like the Netherlands and Bangladesh, there are now pilot projects for amphibious homes and elevated communities that draw direct inspiration from these timeless Southeast Asian villages. They represent a powerful fusion of indigenous knowledge and contemporary engineering, proving that sometimes the most advanced solutions are those that have been tested by time. The stilt villages stand as a living library of human adaptation, a profound demonstration that a successful society is not one that conquers nature, but one that learns to move gracefully with its ever-changing flow. From the lush, monsoon-fed lakes of Southeast Asia, we now ascend to the roof of the world, to an environment so stark and breathtaking it feels otherworldly. Here, on the high-altitude expanse of Lake Titicaca, straddling the border of Peru and Bolivia, the Uros people have achieved something truly extraordinary. They don't just live on the water, they have literally built their world from it, crafting entire floating islands from the humble totora reed. This is not a recent innovation for tourism, but a centuries-old tradition of survival and cultural identity, practiced at a staggering 12,000 feet above sea level, where the air is thin and the sun is intense. The very existence of these islands is a continuous act of creation and renewal. The foundation begins with the dense roots of the totora reeds, which grow in the shallow waters of the lake. These roots are cut into large blocks, and multiple blocks are anchored together with ropes and stakes driven into the lake bed. On top of this buoyant base, layer upon layer of dried totora reeds are woven and stacked, creating a soft, springy living surface that can be up to 2 meters thick. But this foundation is perishable. The reeds at the bottom slowly rot away in the water. Consequently, the island is a living entity that demands constant care. Every few weeks, the inhabitants must add a new layer of reeds to the top, a communal effort that ensures their home remains afloat and intact. This endless cycle of maintenance is a powerful metaphor for their culture itself, always adapting, always being renewed by the hands of the community. Everything on the island is born from the totora. The homes are simple, single-room structures with reed walls and roofs. The traditional boats, known as balsas, are intricately bound bundles of reeds, often adorned with whimsical figureheads. Even the island's anchor system is a masterclass in simple ingenuity, using long eucalyptus poles driven into the lake bottom and tied to the islands with ropes, allowing them to be moved if necessary. For generations, the Uros' way of life was one of relative isolation, centered on fishing for lake trout and hunting for water birds. Their unique adaptation provided a measure of safety, a place where they could maintain their distinct identity and autonomy. Ethnographers like Dr. Lucy Therena Briggs have spent years documenting how these traditions are woven into the fabric of daily life, from the techniques of weaving a new boat to the songs and stories passed down through families. The spiritual connection to the lake, which the Uros call Mama Kota, is profound and central to their worldview. The lake is not merely a resource, it is a sacred, life-giving force. The islands themselves are seen as a direct extension of this spiritual relationship, a place where the human and natural worlds are inextricably linked. This deep reverence informs a sustainable ethos where nothing is taken for granted and every part of the reed is used. However, the modern world has inevitably lapped at the shores of this floating civilization. Today, tourism is a double-edged sword. It provides a crucial source of income for the Uros, who welcome visitors to their islands, demonstrate their craftsmanship, and sell beautifully woven textiles and souvenirs. This economic infusion helps families afford modern necessities like solar panels for electricity, outboard motors for their boats, and education for their children. But this increased contact also brings challenges. There is a delicate balance between sharing their culture and having it become a performance. The sheer volume of visitors can strain the fragile ecosystem of the reeds, and there is a constant risk of their ancient traditions being commodified or diluted for an external audience. Furthermore, environmental pressures like pollution from nearby cities and the impacts of climate change on the lake's water levels present new, existential threats to their way of life. Yet, through all of this, the resilience of the Uros people shines. They have not simply been passive recipients of change. They have actively navigated it, adopting useful technologies while fiercely protecting the core of their cultural identity. Their story is a powerful lesson in adaptability. It demonstrates that sustainability is not about rejecting the modern world, but about integrating its benefits without losing the wisdom of the past. The Uros' innovative use of a single, locally abundant, and completely biodegradable material offers a stark contrast to our global reliance on concrete, steel, and plastic. Architects and designers looking for truly eco-friendly, circular economies need look no further than these floating islands, where every element returns to the earth without a trace. The Uros' world is a magnificent testament to human creativity, proving that a thriving community can be built not by dominating nature, but by learning to float gently upon it in a delicate, enduring, and sacred dance. Yet not all stories of cities on the water are rooted in tangible archaeology or living tradition. Some of the most captivating tales exist in the shimmering space between history and myth. Now we venture into the stormy waters of Celtic legend, to the haunting story of the sunken city of Wise. Off the coast of Brittany, in the rough and romantic northwest of France, folklore whispers of a magnificent metropolis that now lies silent beneath the waves. Wise was said to be the most beautiful city in the world, a place of immense wealth and splendor, protected from the relentless sea by an ingenious system of dikes and a single, massive gate. The key to this gate was entrusted to the city's king, Gradlon, a wise and pious ruler, but the heart of the legend and its ultimate tragedy revolves around his daughter, Princess Dahat. Described as both incredibly beautiful and dangerously wild, Dahat was said to indulge in a life of hedonism and decadence that eventually corrupted the entire city. The legend tells that one night, during a lavish masquerade ball, a mysterious and enchanting knight in red armor appeared and captivated Dahat. Smitten, she gave him anything he desired, and in a fatal moment of passion or trickery, he persuaded her to steal the great key from her sleeping father so they could ride out together along the sea walls. Once she had unlocked the massive gate, the stranger revealed his true demonic nature. He threw the key into the raging ocean, and as the waters began to pour in, he himself vanished into the night. The sea surged through the open gate, swallowing the entire city in a single, catastrophic deluge. King Gradlon awoke to the chaos and managed to escape on his magical horse with his daughter clinging behind him. But a divine voice cried out from the storm, declaring that the weight of Dahat's sin would drag them both under. To save himself, the heartbroken king was forced to push his own daughter into the furious waves. Wise was lost forever, and to this day, Breton fishermen will tell you that during quiet moments at low tide, you can still hear the ghostly bells of the city's drowned churches ringing mournfully from the depths. This powerful narrative is far more than a simple folktale. It is a rich cultural artifact that historians and archaeologists have long scrutinized for kernels of truth. Experts like Dr. Patrick Galliou, a specialist in the history and archaeology of Western France, suggest that the legend of Wise could very well be a mythologized memory of a real coastal settlement that met a watery end. The Brittany coastline has always been fiercely vulnerable to erosion and rising sea levels. There is strong evidence of Roman port facilities and Gallo-Roman settlements along that shore, many of which would have been gradually, or sometimes suddenly, consumed by the advancing ocean over centuries. A particularly severe storm surge or a series of them could have erased a thriving trading port from the map in a single generation, an event so traumatic it would have been seared into the collective memory of the people who lived there. The story's details of sophisticated seawalls and dikes align with known Roman engineering capabilities, making the idea of a well-protected but ultimately doomed city entirely plausible. The legend then becomes a way to explain a historical catastrophe, personifying the impersonal forces of nature into a dramatic tale of moral failure and divine punishment. The sea didn't just rise, it was unleashed by human folly and sin. This transformation of a natural disaster into a moral allegory is a common and powerful way for societies to process unimaginable loss and find meaning in chaos. The enduring power of this story is vividly clear in its profound influence on art and culture long after any real city was forgotten. The tragic, romantic tale of Wise and its doomed princess has inspired composers like Édouard Lolo, who wrote his famous opera Le Roi d'Ise in 1888, bringing the legend to international audiences. Poets and painters, drawn to its themes of beauty, decadence, and apocalyptic punishment, have continually returned to it as a source of inspiration. It taps into a universal and timeless archetype, the sunken city of pride, a maritime Atlantis that serves as a cautionary tale about hubris and the delicate balance between human civilization and the overwhelming power of nature. This raises a compelling question for us all. How many other legends of lost lands and sunken cities might be distorted echoes of real historical events? Folk memories of land subsidence, glacial melt, and tsunamis have likely been woven into the myths of cultures all around the world, from the Welsh tales of Cantre Gwaelod to the Indian legends of the submerged city of Dwarka. These stories reveal less about the specific engineering of a city and more about the human psyche, our deep-seated fear of the ocean's capricious power, and our need to believe that our survival depends not just on strong walls, but on moral and spiritual fortitude. The city of Wise may never be found on any map, but its story continues to float, forever preserved in the collective imagination, a poignant reminder that even the grandest of human achievements can be reclaimed by the sea. Moving from the realm of myth into the concrete world of physics and materials, we uncover perhaps the most awe-inspiring aspect of these aquatic civilizations, their profound engineering genius. To construct a city that floats is to engage in a constant dialogue with the fundamental forces of nature, primarily buoyancy, the upward force exerted by a fluid that opposes the weight of an object. Ancient builders may not have articulated it with Archimedes' principle, but they understood its practical application intimately. The key was achieving neutral buoyancy, where the structure displaces a volume of water whose weight is equal to its own, allowing it to rest on the surface rather than sinking below it. This was managed through a brilliant understanding of weight distribution and the strategic use of lightweight, naturally buoyant materials. Consider the vast array of resources they employed. In Mesopotamia, the marsh Arabs known as the Madden constructed entire villages from Kasab reeds, bundled together to form massive, stable platforms that could support mudhif guest houses. The Uros of Lake Titicaca, as we've seen, relied entirely on the totora reed. In colder climates, like the Slavic regions of Eastern Europe, builders utilized buoyant logs lashed together to create rafts that could support wooden longhouses. Perhaps one of the most ingenious adaptations came from the ancient Andean cultures, who used woven totora reed boats so tightly bound they were essentially waterproof, and some accounts even suggest the use of inflated animal skins, like those of seals or llamas, lashed beneath rafts to provide additional lift. These weren't haphazard experiments, they were calculated applications of material science, using what was locally abundant and testing different weaves, bundles, and lashings for maximum strength and flotation. As engineer and historian Dr. John Otzendorf highlights, these builders possessed a material intelligence that we are only now beginning to fully appreciate. They knew that a tightly packed bundle of reeds trapped air, increasing its buoyancy, and that a broad, flat platform distributed weight more evenly than a narrow one, preventing it from tipping or taking on water. This material knowledge was then scaled up into breathtakingly complex urban projects. The city of Vijayanagara in 14th century India serves as a spectacular example. While not entirely floating, its mastery of water was integral to its design. The city featured an extensive network of aqueducts, canals, and sophisticated irrigation tanks that managed water flow for both agriculture and daily life. For grand religious festivals and royal ceremonies, engineers would construct temporary but enormous floating pavilions and stages on these water bodies. These were elaborate platforms built on rafts of buoyant wood and decorated with textiles and carvings, capable of supporting the weight of dozens of performers, priests, and even royalty. Planning required to ensure these temporary structures remained stable and secure during crowded events speaks to an advanced, almost modern, understanding of civil engineering and public safety. The Romans, famed for their architectural prowess, also contributed significantly to floating engineering, though often for military rather than residential purposes. Their pontoon bridges are legendary. To rapidly cross wide rivers like the Rhine or the Danube, Roman engineers would lash together fleets of boats, anchoring them securely, and then laying a flat roadway of wooden planks across their decks. This created a stable, temporary bridge that could support the march of legions, complete with their supply wagons and cavalry. The speed and efficiency with which they could deploy these structures was a key tactical advantage and remains a benchmark in military engineering to this day. This concept of modularity, creating a large, stable whole from many smaller, identical floating units, is a principle that directly informs the most ambitious floating city projects of the 21st century. When we compare these ancient techniques to contemporary projects like the floating neighborhoods in the Netherlands or the proposed oceanic city, the parallels are striking. The Dutch, facing constant threats from the sea, have pioneered modern amphibious architecture. Homes in communities like Ijsberg are not built on fixed foundations, but on hollow concrete boxes that float on the water's surface, rising and falling with the tides. They are moored to flexible poles that allow vertical movement but prevent horizontal drift, a high-tech evolution of the Uros anchoring system. The proposed designs for Oceanic City take the Roman concept of modularity to its logical extreme, envisioning a hexagonal archipelago of buoyant platforms, each serving a different urban function: residential, agricultural, energy production, that can be interconnected and reconfigured as needed. The core principles are identical: understanding buoyancy, distributing weight, and using flexible connections to accommodate the motion of water. The main difference lies in the materials: fiberglass, steel, and concrete composites instead of reeds and logs, and the power source, with solar panels and turbines replacing human and animal labor. This continuity across millennia offers a vital lesson. The successes and failures of the past provide an invaluable blueprint. The ancient world shows us that the most resilient floating structures are those that work in harmony with the water's dynamics, not against them. The failure of a pontoon bridge in a storm or the gradual waterlogging of a reed platform taught hard lessons about material durability and the need for constant maintenance. These are realities that modern engineers must still contend with. The story of Tenochtitlan is a sobering reminder that even the most brilliant water management system can be vulnerable to external disruption, whether from conquest or, in our case, the unprecedented forces of climate change. The sophistication of pre-industrial engineering was not a product of magic or mystery, but of meticulous observation, iterative experimentation, and a deep, respectful dialogue with the natural world. Their floating cities stand as permanent proof that human intellect, when applied with creativity and patience, can achieve the seemingly impossible, turning the most unstable of elements into a foundation for civilization. While the engineering marvels of these floating cities are breathtaking, their true lifeblood often flowed not through canals of stone or reeds, but through channels of commerce and exchange. The decision to build on water was frequently a strategic economic one, transforming these settlements into dynamic hubs of trade that leveraged their unique position for immense advantage. Consider the fundamental geography. Before the invention of paved roads and railways, moving heavy goods over land was a slow, expensive, and perilous endeavor. A single cart pulled by oxen could carry a limited amount, was vulnerable to bandits, and churned to a halt in mud or rough terrain. Water, by contrast, offered a natural superhighway. A single large boat, propelled by wind or current, could transport tons of cargo with far greater efficiency and security. A floating city, by its very nature, had its docks and warehouses built directly into its foundation, becoming a self-contained port where merchants from distant lands could dock right at the marketplace. This economic reality gave rise to some of history's most fascinating commercial centers. In the vast marshlands of ancient Mesopotamia, the so-called marsh Arabs established vibrant communities on artificial islands woven from reed. These were not just homes, they were nodes in a complex trading network. Their location amidst the Tigris and Euphrates rivers allowed them to act as middlemen, gathering bitumen, a natural tar used for waterproofing from the swamps, and dates and grains from the surrounding agricultural lands, and loading them onto boats bound for urban centers like and Uruk. Similarly, the ancient canal cities of China, such as those in the lower Yangtze River Delta, were engineered labyrinths of waterways. These canals were the equivalent of modern-day interstate systems, designed specifically to facilitate the movement of rice, silk, and ceramics from the productive countryside to the imperial capital and beyond. The city itself was the central switching station for this entire economic engine. A powerful and enduring example of this principle is the incredible city of Ganvi in Benin, West Africa. Built on the vast surface of Lake Nokaway, Ganvi's story begins in the 16th or 17th century as a place of refuge. The local Tofanu people, seeking to escape the slave raids of the powerful Fon Kingdom, took to the water because their captors, bound by religious prohibition, would not pursue them onto the lake. What began as a defensive sanctuary evolved into a thriving economic center. The lake provided unparalleled safety, but it also provided opportunity. The people of Ganvi became master fishermen, developing sustainable aquaculture techniques in the brackish waters. Their stilted houses and elevated marketplaces became a bustling hub where fish, smoked and preserved using methods perfected over generations, were traded for goods from the mainland: grains, textiles, and crafted tools. The lake was their shield, their home, their farm, and their marketplace all in one. Their canoes were their delivery trucks, their taxis, and their mobile stalls, weaving a constant flow of commerce through the watery streets. As economic historian Dr. Janet Abu-Lughod meticulously detailed in her work on pre-modern world systems, locations like these did far more than just move merchandise. They were crucibles of cultural and intellectual exchange. A merchant boat arriving in Tenochtitlan didn't just carry obsidian or jade. It carried news, artistic styles, and technological ideas from distant regions. A trader docking in a Mesopotamian marsh community might share new methods of metalworking or astronomical observations picked up from another civilization. This constant flow of people and ideas, facilitated by the accessibility of water routes, accelerated innovation and created a cosmopolitan atmosphere in these aquatic hubs. The types of commodities that fueled these economies were as diverse as the cities themselves. There were the necessities of life, fish, of course, but also salt, a precious mineral crucial for food preservation that was often harvested from coastal lagoons or evaporated from seawater. Then came the luxury goods that signaled status and wealth: spices from distant islands, finely woven textiles, animal pelts, exotic feathers for adornment, and crafted goods like pottery and jewelry. This variety supported not just the basic needs of a dense population, but also allowed for economic specialization. A floating city could support not only fishermen and farmers, but also full-time artisans, merchants, priests, and administrators, leading to the complex social structures we associate with advanced civilization. This incredible advantage, however, came with its own set of unique and daunting challenges. Maintaining these commercial networks was a constant battle against nature and geography. Siltation was a perpetual threat. Rivers constantly deposit sediment, which can slowly fill in canals and harbors, choking off the very access that made the city prosperous. Dredging these channels required organized communal labor and significant resources. The wooden pilings supporting stilt houses and docks were in a constant state of decay, attacked by waterborne parasites and fungi, demanding an endless cycle of repair and replacement. Furthermore, a water-based economy was inherently vulnerable to the whims of the environment. A prolonged drought could lower water levels, stranding trade routes and isolating the city. A severe storm or flood could destroy docks, wipe out fishing fleets, and ruin stored commodities in a single catastrophic event. The very thing that gave them life could also bring devastation. The economic history of floating cities is thus a story of brilliant adaptation constantly tested by the relentless forces of nature, a high-stakes balancing act between unparalleled opportunity and existential risk. The true genius of these aquatic civilizations lies not just in their ability to build on water, but in their profound understanding of how to live with it sustainably. Their approach was one of seamless integration, a philosophy that turned potential environmental threats into foundational strengths. At the heart of this was a masterful use of renewable, locally sourced materials. The builders of these cities didn't import exotic hardwoods or mine stone from distant quarries. They looked to the ecosystems thriving right at their doorstep. The Uros of Lake Titicaca used totora reeds for everything from their islands and homes to their boats and tools. In Southeast Asia, bamboo and nipa palm were the structural staples, prized for their incredible strength, flexibility, and rapid regrowth. The Mesopotamian marsh Arabs utilized kasab reeds, weaving them into sturdy architectural forms. This wasn't a matter of primitive limitation. It was a sophisticated circular economy. These materials were abundant, required minimal processing energy, and at the end of their life cycle, they would biodegrade harmlessly back into the environment from which they came, leaving virtually no trace. This stands in stark contrast to our modern reliance on concrete and steel, whose production is a major source of global carbon emissions and which leave behind stubborn, permanent waste. This sustainable material choice was just one part of a larger, holistic design for resilience. These cities were engineered to be dynamic, not static. The stilt villages of Tonle Sap are a perfect example of adaptive architecture. Their tall, flexible poles allow the entire community to rise and fall with the dramatic seasonal flooding, a design that accepts the water's motion as a fact of life rather than a problem to be eliminated. This is resilience through flexibility, a concept modern engineers are now desperately trying to incorporate into flood-prone areas with amphibious homes and adjustable foundations. Furthermore, the very layout of these cities often incorporated natural water cycles into their core functioning. Tenochtitlan's Chinampas were far more than just highly productive farms. As environmental scientist Dr. Luz Maria del Carmen Calvo Iraheta explains, this system was a masterpiece of ecological engineering. The canals between the garden plots acted as aquatic highways, but they also served as habitats for fish and waterfowl, adding another protein source to the diet. The carefully selected aquatic plants lining the edges helped to filter and purify the water, removing excess nutrients and preventing algal blooms. The constant movement of canoe traffic oxygenated the water, supporting a healthy ecosystem. The Chinampas themselves, built from layered vegetation and rich lake sediment, created a perfectly balanced soil that retained moisture and nutrients, requiring no artificial fertilizers. This was a closed-loop system that minimized waste and maximized efficiency, producing enough food to support an immense urban population without degrading its environment. Perhaps the most poignant lesson from these ancient marvels is the delicate and often tragic line between adaptation and exploitation. These civilizations demonstrate that the most successful human habitats are those that work within the carrying capacity of their local environment. They adapted to the water's rhythms, harnessing its benefits without attempting to fundamentally alter or conquer it. The Aztecs managed the saline and freshwater systems of Lake Texcoco with intricate dikes and aqueducts, maintaining a careful equilibrium for centuries. However, the story of their downfall reveals the vulnerability of even the most brilliant systems to external forces that operate on a philosophy of exploitation. The Spanish conquistadors saw the lake not as a life-giving partner to be managed, but as a swamp to be drained, an obstacle to their vision of a land-based colonial city. In their quest for dominance and control, they destroyed the delicate hydraulic balance, ultimately leading to the city's submergence in polluted water and its eventual burial. This pattern repeats itself elsewhere. Many of the crannogs of Scotland were abandoned not because the technology failed, but because political stability reduced the need for fortified islands, and economic shifts made land-based farming more desirable. The story of these cities forces us to confront a critical question. Were they ultimately fragile? Their demise often came not from a failure of their sustainable design, but from a clash with outside systems that prioritized short-term extraction over long-term harmony. This historical insight offers a powerful blueprint for our own future. particularly as we face the escalating crises of climate change, sea level rise, and resource scarcity. The wisdom of these ancient builders is now being rediscovered and re-evaluated by architects, urban planners, and environmental scientists. The Chinampa system is being studied as a model for urban agriculture in dense cities, capable of providing local food, managing stormwater, and enhancing biodiversity. The principle of building with lightweight, renewable, and biodegradable materials is inspiring a new generation of eco-architects. The adaptive stilt designs of Southeast Asia are directly informing projects in flood-prone regions from Bangladesh to the Netherlands, where homes are designed to float on rising waters rather than simply behind higher walls. The irony is profound. The very solutions we are now seeking through advanced technology were already perfected by ancient cultures through intimate observation and coexistence with nature. Their legacy is a testament to the fact that sustainability is not a new invention, but a rediscovery of a very old and very wise way of living on this planet. But as captivating as these legends are, they often lead us to blur the line between poetic imagination and historical fact. The human mind seems irresistibly drawn to the romance of a lost paradise swallowed by the sea, and no story embodies this more than the tale of Atlantis. For centuries, explorers and dreamers have searched for this fabled island nation described by Plato around 360 BCE, often picturing it as a glittering metropolis of advanced technology floating serenely on the waves. The reality, according to the vast majority of historians and archaeologists, is far more nuanced. Plato himself presented Atlantis not as a historical record, but as a moral allegory within his dialogues, a cautionary tale about the hubris of a nation that dared to challenge the gods and was punished by being swallowed by the ocean in a single day and night of misfortune. Most scholars today agree that Atlantis was almost certainly a philosophical device, a fictionalized account used to illustrate his ideas about ideal states and the cycle of civilization. Yet the power of the story suggests it wasn't created from nothing. Many researchers, including archaeologists like Dr. Christos Doumas, who has spent decades excavating the site of Akrotiri on the Greek island of Santorini, point to real-world disasters that could have inspired such a lasting legend. Around the year 1600 BCE, the volcanic island of Thera, now Santorini, was home to a sophisticated Minoan settlement at Akrotiri. This was a thriving, advanced town with multi-story buildings, elaborate frescoes, and complex drainage systems. Then the volcano erupted with cataclysmic force, one of the largest volcanic events in human history. The eruption likely caused a massive tsunami that would have devastated Minoan settlements on nearby Crete, over 60 miles away, and blanketed Akrotiri in layers of ash and pumice, preserving it much like Pompeii. For the ancient world, the sudden and utter destruction of an entire island civilization, seemingly erased by the sea and fire, would have been a traumatic and inexplicable event. It is not difficult to see how the memory of such a catastrophe, passed down through generations of storytellers, could have evolved into the core of Plato's tale of a mighty empire that sank beneath the waves. The myth of Atlantis, therefore, is not a map to a lost city, but rather a profound echo of a real historical trauma, a cultural memory of nature's overwhelming power. This pattern of myth preserving a kernel of technological truth repeats itself across other cultures. The Celtic legends of the British Isles, for instance, are filled with stories of otherworldly kingdoms located in lakes and misty waters. The Lady of the Lake in Arthurian myth, who presents the sword Excalibur to Arthur from her watery domain, is a famous example. These enchanting tales likely found their origins in the very real site of crannogs and lake dwellings that were common across Scotland, Ireland, and Wales for thousands of years. To a person living centuries after these structures were abandoned, stumbling upon the remains of a man-made island with its preserved wooden posts rising eerily from a misty lake would have been a mysterious and awe-inspiring discovery. It would have been natural to assume that such a place was not built by ordinary people, but was the work of gods, fairies, or heroes from a lost age. The folklore becomes a way to explain the inexplicable ruins of a forgotten technology, weaving a magical narrative around the archaeological evidence that was plain to see but impossible for them to fully understand. The same can be said for the numerous global legends of sunken cities, from the Welsh kingdom of Cantre'r Gwaelod to the Indian city of Dwarka. These stories often emerge in coastal areas or regions with a history of seismic activity and rising sea levels. They serve as folk memories of landscapes that were indeed lost to the water, whether through a sudden cataclysm or the slow, inexorable creep of erosion over centuries. The details become embellished with magic and morality, but the central event, a community being consumed by the sea, often has a basis in geological or archaeological reality. This leads us to a deeper question about our own fascination. Why does the idea of a lost aquatic civilization hold such a powerful grip on our collective imagination? Perhaps it's because these stories represent the ultimate mystery and the ultimate warning. They speak to a primal fear of the deep, unknown ocean and the fragility of our own achievements. A city on land can be ruined and its stones reused, but a city lost to the sea is gone completely, preserved in an inaccessible, dreamlike state, forever perfect in our mind's eye. It becomes a blank canvas onto which we can project our fantasies of a more perfect, more advanced, or more spiritual past. This fascination, however, can sometimes shape and even distort our interpretation of history. The relentless search for a literal Atlantis has, at times, diverted attention and resources from the study of actual, verifiable aquatic civilizations like Tenochtitlan or the Uros, whose real stories are arguably more impressive than any myth because they were achieved by human ingenuity without the need for magic or super technology. The critical work of modern archaeology is to gently separate these threads, to appreciate the cultural power of the myth while honoring the factual truth of the history. It allows us to understand that the real wonder is not in a fictional sunken city of gods, but in the very real, audacious, and brilliant accomplishments of our ancestors who, with nothing but simple tools and profound wisdom, learned to make the water itself their home. But to view these floating cities solely as feats of engineering or economic strategy is to miss their deepest dimension. For the cultures that built them, water was far more than a physical resource. It was a sacred element woven into the very fabric of their spiritual identity and worldview. Across continents and eras, the decision to build a life upon the waves was often an act of profound symbolic significance, a way of placing the community at the nexus of the divine and the earthly. In Hinduism, rivers are not merely bodies of water, they are goddesses. The Ganges, known as Ganga Ma, is believed to have descended from heaven to purify the earth and its people. To live on or beside such a sacred entity is to exist in a state of perpetual grace and connection, where daily activities like bathing, cooking, and trading are imbued with spiritual meaning. This concept of water as a purifying, life-giving force is a universal archetype found in the baptismal rites of Christianity and the ritual cleansings in Islam, reflecting a deep-seated human recognition of water's power to renew both the body and the soul. Conversely, water also holds a potent place in mythology as a symbol of primordial chaos and creation. From the Babylonian epic of Enuma Elish, where the world is formed from the body of the saltwater goddess Tiamat, to the biblical book of Genesis, where the Spirit of God moves over the face of the deep before calling forth light and order. Water represents the formless, potential-filled void from which all life emerges. By building their cities upon this chaotic, creative element, these ancient peoples were making a powerful cosmological statement. They were asserting their role as co-creators, imposing human order on the divine chaos, and establishing a fragile, sacred balance between the two. This wasn't an act of defiance against nature, but a respectful partnership with it. Anthropologist Dr. Veronica Strang has extensively documented how this relationship shapes entire cultures, suggesting that a society's engagement with water profoundly influences its social organization, its artistic expressions, and its fundamental beliefs about humanity's place in the universe. The very architecture of a floating city, therefore, becomes a physical prayer, a manifestation of a spiritual dialogue between the human and the natural world. We can see this sacred dialogue alive and well in the daily rituals of contemporary water communities. In the stilt villages of Southeast Asia, it is common to see small spirit houses attached to docks or perched at the edge of verandas, offerings of flowers and incense left to appease and honor the guardians of the lake or river. Before a fishing expedition or the launch of a new boat, a village elder might perform a brief ceremony to ask for protection and bounty, acknowledging that their livelihood is a gift from the aquatic world. The Uros people of Lake Titicaca refer to the lake as Mama Kota, or Mother Lake, a living, conscious entity that provides for them and to which they owe respect and gratitude. Their entire existence is a continuous act of reciprocity. Even the legend of Wise, with its moral lesson of hubris and punishment, reinforces the idea that the sea is a powerful, sentient force that must be respected. These practices are not quaint superstitions. They are the mechanisms that reinforce a sustainable and respectful relationship with the environment. When you believe a river is home to a spirit, you are far less likely to pollute it. When you see a lake as a divine mother, you will manage its resources with care for future generations. This spiritual framework provided a powerful source of social cohesion and longevity for these aquatic civilizations. Shared beliefs and collective rituals, from water festivals to boat racing ceremonies, strengthened community bonds and created a strong sense of shared identity and purpose. This cultural cohesion was as vital to their survival as the sturdy pilings beneath their homes. It fostered a spirit of cooperation necessary for the immense communal tasks of maintaining dikes, rebuilding after storms, and renewing reed islands. The spiritual significance of their aquatic home gave them a powerful reason to persevere, to adapt, and to protect their way of life against all odds. It transformed a challenging environment into a cherished homeland, a place of meaning and belonging that was worth any hardship. This leads us to a poignant question for our modern, often secularized world. In an age where we tend to view water primarily as an industrial resource, a chemical compound, or a recreational backdrop, what have we lost by setting aside that sacred connection? The environmental crises we face today, polluted rivers, draining aquifers, rising seas, are, at their heart, crises of relationship. We have forgotten how to see the natural world as a sacred partner. The ancient builders of floating cities can remind us that sustainability is not just a technical problem to be solved with better engineering, but a spiritual and ethical one. It is about rekindling a sense of reverence, awe, and responsibility for the water that gives us life. Their legacy challenges us to look at a river and see not just H2O, but a story, a history, and a living entity that deserves our deepest respect. Perhaps by remembering their wisdom, we can begin to build a future that is not only technologically advanced but also spiritually grounded, creating a world where we once again live in harmonious and sacred dialogue with the water that surrounds us. Yet for all their resilience and ingenuity, the floating cities we've marveled at were not invincible. Their very existence was a delicate dance with nature, and like all dances, it could be disrupted. The factors that led to their decline or outright disappearance form a complex tapestry, woven from threads of environmental change, human conflict, and shifting economic currents. Historians who study societal collapse, like Dr. Joseph Tainter, argue that complex civilizations often fail when the energy required to maintain their complexity outweighs the benefits, leading to a painful simplification. This theory finds a powerful echo in the fate of many aquatic settlements, where the immense and constant labor needed to hold the water at bay finally became unsustainable. The crannogs of Scotland and Ireland, those ancient artificial islands that stood for millennia, did not vanish in a cataclysm. Instead, they were gradually abandoned as the political landscape transformed. With the consolidation of power under stable kingdoms and the reduction in local clan warfare, the primary reason for their existence defense simply evaporated. The tremendous effort of maintaining a fortified island home no longer made sense when a safer, more convenient life on solid ground became a viable option. This is a classic case of technological obsolescence driven by social change. The crannog was a brilliant solution to a problem that eventually ceased to exist. In other regions, the environment itself became the agent of decline, often accelerated by human activity. The magnificent marsh communities of Mesopotamia, descendants of the ancient Sumerian cultures, thrived for centuries in a symbiotic relationship with the Tigris and Euphrates rivers. Their way of life was built upon an intricate understanding of the seasonal floods and the rich ecology of the reed beds. However, this balance was profoundly disrupted by large-scale irrigation projects upstream, begun in the 20th century. These dams and canals, designed to boost agricultural production for a growing modern state, fundamentally altered the hydrology of the entire region. The life-giving flood pulses were stopped, and the water that did flow down was often laden with agricultural chemicals. The marshes began to shrivel, the salinity of the water increased, and the vast, biodiverse wetlands that had sustained a unique culture for generations began to desertify at an alarming rate. By the 1990s, the United Nations Environment Program estimated that over 90% of the Mesopotamian marshes had been lost. The Madden people, the so-called marsh Arabs, were displaced en masse, their floating villages left high and dry on cracked, barren earth, their ancient knowledge rendered useless by an environmental catastrophe they did not create. Here, collapse was not a matter of social complexity, but of a critical resource base being deliberately and systematically destroyed by external forces. Of course, the most direct and brutal force of destruction often came from other humans. The conquest of Tenochtitlan by Hernán Cortés and his indigenous allies is the most stark example. The Aztec capital was not simply defeated in battle, it was systematically dismantled and its very foundation erased. The Spanish, baffled and repulsed by the aquatic city, saw the lake not as a marvel of engineering but as an unhealthy swamp. Their worldview was terrestrial, and their vision for a new colonial city required dry, solid ground. Following the siege, they embarked on a centuries-long project of draining Lake Texcoco, demolishing the intricate dikes and aqueducts, and filling in the canals to create the streets of what would become Mexico City. This was more than just a military victory. It was a form of cultural and environmental imperialism that replaced a sophisticated aquatic ecosystem with a European-style grid, forever burying one of humanity's greatest architectural achievements. The pattern of colonialism disrupting and destroying indigenous water-based communities is a global one. From the draining of English fens that displaced local communities to the imposition of fixed land property laws on nomadic aquatic peoples in Southeast Asia, the rise of centralized, land-based states often came at the expense of these adaptive, fluid cultures. Their way of life was seen as backward, inefficient, or simply inconvenient to the new administrative order. When we step back to examine these case studies, a sobering pattern of common vulnerabilities emerges. Floating cities, for all their strengths, often existed in a state of precarious equilibrium. Their specialized adaptation was their greatest strength, but also their greatest weakness, a concept biologists call the specialist dilemma. A society exquisitely tuned to a specific environment is incredibly vulnerable to any change in that environment, whether natural or human-made. They were highly dependent on a continuous supply of specific, often renewable, building materials. A blight affecting the totora reeds of Lake Titicaca or the Kasab reeds of Mesopotamia would have been a crisis on par with a famine. Furthermore, their economies were frequently specialized around aquatic resources, fish, trade, transportation. A shift in trade routes, the depletion of a key fish stock, or the silting up of a vital channel could strangle their economic lifeline. This inherent fragility asks a critical question of our modern ambitions. As we look to build new floating cities to address climate change and overpopulation, how do we avoid these historical pitfalls? The lesson from the past is not to abandon the idea, but to build in resilience. Modern floating settlements must be designed with flexibility and diversity in mind. Diverse economies, not solely reliant on the sea. Diverse building materials that are not vulnerable to a single point of failure, and governance structures that are adaptive and inclusive. They must learn from the fate of Tenochtitlan and ensure that water management works with the natural hydrology, not against it. The story of these lost civilizations is not a warning against building on water, but a crucial guidebook on how to do it wisely, respectfully, and sustainably for the long term. Their ruins, both physical and mythical, are not just relics. They are the foundational pillars upon which our aquatic future must be carefully built. The legacy of ancient aquatic ingenuity is not confined to history books. It is rising once again from the waters, reimagined for the challenges of the 21st century. Today, a new generation of architects and visionaries is looking to the past to build the future, creating floating communities that directly echo the wisdom of the Uros, the Madden, and the Aztecs. In the Netherlands, a nation famously engaged in a centuries-long dialogue with the sea, floating neighborhoods are already a thriving reality. In the Ijsberg district of Amsterdam, hundreds of modern amphibious homes rest on hollow concrete bases, gently bobbing on the water's surface. These are not simple houseboats. They are permanent, two-story residences with gardens and modern amenities, all designed to rise and fall with the rhythm of the tides, moored to flexible piles that keep them in place. This is urban resilience made manifest, a direct application of the ancient stilt village principle, updated with contemporary materials and engineering. Architect Koen Olthuis, a leading voice in this movement, frames it as building on water without fighting it, a philosophy that prioritizes flexibility and symbiosis over rigid control. His firm, Water Studio, designs everything from floating schools and hospitals to entire apartment complexes, envisioning a future where city expansions happen not on scarce, expensive land, but on the abundant surface of the water. This vision scales up dramatically with projects like Oceanic City, a concept developed in partnership with UN Habitat. This proposed floating metropolis is designed to be a blueprint for sustainable living in an age of rising seas. Envisioned as a constellation of hexagonal platforms, each measuring roughly 2 acres, the city would be modular and flexible, Some platforms would host housing, others would be dedicated to vertical farming, renewable energy generation, or cultural spaces, all interconnected by a network of canals and walkways. The design incorporates closed-loop systems for water and waste, draws power from solar and aquatic turbines, and is intended to be storm-proof and self-sustaining. It is, in essence, a modern, high-tech reinterpretation of the Chinampas of Tenochtitlan, a highly productive, ecologically integrated human habitat that works within its environment rather than dominating it. The urgency for such innovations is palpable in places like the Maldives, an island nation where 80% of the land lies less than 1 meter above sea level. Facing existential threat from ocean rise, the government is actively exploring the development of floating urban districts, seeing them not as a futuristic fantasy, but as a necessary strategy for national survival. Yet for every inspiring example like the long-established houseboat communities of Sausalito, California, or the floating fish farms of Norway, there are significant hurdles that prevent widespread adoption. The challenges are less about engineering and more about economics and governance. The initial cost of constructing floating infrastructure is currently higher than traditional land reclamation, posing a barrier for many developing nations most at risk from sea level rise. Furthermore, the legal framework for building on water is murky at best. Maritime law governs ships and national law governs land, but who has jurisdiction over a permanent floating city? Issues of ownership, taxation, and citizenship for residents of these aquatic settlements remain largely unanswered, creating a regulatory no-man's land that can deter investment and development. Public perception is another formidable obstacle. The romantic image of life on the water often clashes with the practical realities of maintenance, potential isolation, and the psychological adjustment to a constantly moving environment. Convincing people to trade their solid foundations for a floating one requires a profound cultural shift. Perhaps the most critical lesson modern designers are taking from history is the importance of locality and flexibility. The ancient builders did not import materials. They used what was abundant and renewable in their immediate environment. Modern projects are increasingly following this principle, exploring the use of locally sourced timber, recycled plastics, and other sustainable composites to reduce both cost and environmental footprint. The modular, adaptable nature of platforms, inspired by the Roman pontoon bridges, allows communities to expand, contract, or reconfigure as their needs change, a stark contrast to the static, inflexible nature of most concrete urban sprawl. This forward-looking section ultimately forces us to confront a pivotal question. Are these floating cities a genuine, scalable solution to the intersecting crises of climate change and urban overcrowding? Or are they merely a romanticized ideal, a high-tech fantasy for the wealthy? The answer likely lies in a balanced perspective. They are not a silver bullet that will replace land-based living, but they represent a crucial and increasingly necessary tool in the urban planning toolkit. They offer a pathway to resilience for coastal communities, a way to preserve agricultural land by moving urban expansion onto water, and a living laboratory for developing the closed-loop, sustainable systems our planet desperately needs. The ancient floating cities did not fail because the concept was flawed. They fell to conquest, environmental shifts, or economic change. Their modern successors, armed with both ancient wisdom and new technology, have the potential to learn from those past vulnerabilities, creating habitats that are not only technologically advanced but also socially just, environmentally regenerative, and truly built to last upon the ever-changing sea. The quest to uncover these lost aquatic worlds has been revolutionized by a suite of high-tech tools that allow archaeologists to see beneath the waves without ever getting wet. Sonar technology, particularly multi-beam and side-scan sonar, has become the workhorse of underwater survey. By sending out sound pulses and meticulously mapping the returning echoes, researchers can create incredibly detailed, three-dimensional maps of lake and seafloors, revealing the ghostly outlines of submerged settlements that have been invisible for millennia. This is how sites like the Neolithic stilt village in Lake Zurich, Switzerland, were first identified. From the surface, the water looks ordinary, but the sonar data revealed a sprawling prehistoric community of over 20 well-preserved houses, their wooden posts still standing upright in the mud as if frozen in time. This non-invasive method allows scientists to pinpoint exactly where to focus their efforts, preserving the fragile sites until careful excavation can begin. Once a site is located, the real detective work starts, and it often begins with tree rings. Dendrochronology, the science of dating timber by analyzing the patterns of annual growth rings, is a game-changer for waterlogged sites. Because wood preserves magnificently in oxygen-poor underwater environments, archaeologists can often recover posts and planks that are thousands of years old but look like they were cut yesterday. Each tree's ring pattern is unique, a fingerprint influenced by the climate conditions of each year. By taking core samples from these ancient logs and matching their patterns to a master chronology, a continuous timeline built from studying both ancient and modern trees, researchers like Dr. Francesco Menotti can determine the exact year a tree was felled. This doesn't just give a date, it tells a story. For the Lake Zurich site, dendrochronology revealed that the entire village was constructed in a single, massive building project around 3234 BCE, not built up slowly over generations as previously assumed. This finding fundamentally shifts our understanding of Neolithic societies, proving they were capable of sophisticated, large-scale communal planning and organization, mobilizing an entire community to work towards a common goal. To flesh out the details of daily life in these communities, scientists turn to the tiny treasures preserved in the anaerobic mud. Underwater excavations are a painstakingly slow process, often involving divers using handheld suction devices to gently remove sediment and reveal artifacts exactly where they were dropped centuries ago. The waterlogged conditions create a time capsule where organic materials that would have vanished on land survive intact. In addition to the expected stone tools and pottery shards, archaeologists have recovered astonishingly personal items: a wooden bowl with the carver's marking still visible, a finely woven fishing net, a piece of bread charred in a cooking fire, and even the leather shoe of a child. Perhaps most hauntingly, in the silt around these sites, they have found the preserved footprints of the inhabitants themselves, a momentary impression in the soft lakeshore mud that endured long after the person who made it walked away. These aren't just objects, they are intimate connections to individuals, allowing us to reconstruct not only what they ate or how they built, but how they lived their lives from moment to moment. Beyond artifacts, the sediment itself holds a vast archive of past climates. By extracting core samples from the lakebed near these settlements, scientists can analyze ancient pollen grains, insect remains, and plant fossils. This field, called paleoecology, allows them to reconstruct the environment the villagers would have known. They can determine what the weather was like in a given century, what crops they were growing on the nearby shore, and how the local forest composition changed over time. This data helps answer critical questions about why a site was abandoned. Was it due to a prolonged drought that lowered the lake level, stranding their canoes far from water, or was it a period of intense flooding that repeatedly swamped their homes? This scientific approach moves us beyond speculation and into evidence-based understanding of the environmental pressures these aquatic civilizations faced. However, this powerful ability to uncover the past comes with a heavy ethical responsibility. The very act of excavation is destructive. Once a site is brought to the surface, the unique preservative environment is lost forever. This raises difficult questions about whether some sites should be left undisturbed, preserved in situ for future generations with even more advanced technology. Furthermore, many submerged sites hold deep cultural and spiritual significance for indigenous communities. The bones of ancestors or sacred objects may lie in these waters, and their recovery by outside archaeologists without consent can be a form of ongoing cultural harm. Modern archaeology is increasingly grappling with these issues, moving towards collaborative models where descendant communities are partners from the very beginning of a project, helping to decide what should be studied, how it should be interpreted, and what should be respectfully left in place. The goal is no longer just to extract information, but to do so in a way that honors the legacy of the people who built these incredible floating worlds, ensuring their story is told with both scientific rigor and profound respect. Beyond their physical remains and historical records, the allure of floating cities has always rippled powerfully through the realm of imagination, inspiring artists and writers to explore what these aquatic worlds represent in the human soul. The great English painter J.M.W. Turner, for instance, was obsessed with the sublime power of the sea and the fragile presence of humanity within it. His turbulent seascapes, where ships and distant ports are often mere suggestions amidst a furious, glorious chaos of light and water, capture a central truth about these settlements. Their breathtaking beauty is forever intertwined with their profound vulnerability. He wasn't just painting water, he was capturing the emotional resonance of a life built upon an unpredictable, mighty force, a theme that echoes the real-life anxieties and triumphs of places like the stilt villages of Tonle Sap. This symbolic power finds one of its most enchanting expressions in the animated worlds of Hayao Miyazaki. His film Castle in the Sky features the legendary floating city of Laputa, a breathtaking metropolis of soaring spires and serene robots, sustained by a giant levitation crystal and floating in peaceful isolation above the clouds. Miyazaki's Laputa is a masterpiece of ambivalence. It is a utopian paradise, a symbol of a lost, advanced civilization living in harmony with nature, but it is also a weapon of immense destructive power, coveted and corrupted by those who seek to dominate. This duality perfectly encapsulates our own cultural fascination, the floating city as a symbol of both a peaceful, ecological ideal and a potential instrument of hubris, a place of refuge that can become a fortress of isolation. It is a dream of escape from a troubled world, yet it is haunted by the very human flaws that created that world in the first place. Literature has long used the floating city as a potent setting to explore complex themes of adventure, alienation, and the human condition. Jules Verne's classic 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea gives us not a city, but a mobile, underwater counterpart in Captain Nemo's Nautilus. This technological marvel is a self-contained world, allowing its inhabitants to live entirely separate from the land-based society Nemo rejects. The submarine becomes a floating, or rather diving city of one, a symbol of ultimate freedom and intellectual independence, but also of profound loneliness and misanthropic exile. Centuries later, author China Miéville picked up this thread and wove it into something entirely new in his novel The Scar. Set on the terrifying and magnificent Armada, a floating city composed of thousands of hijacked ships lashed together, the book delves into the politics and psychology of a community that is permanently unmoored, both physically and socially. The Armada is a city of exiles, pirates, and outcasts, constantly moving through a treacherous ocean. It is a powerful exploration of what it means to build an identity and a society without the anchor of land or tradition, a direct literary descendant of the historical pirate havens that once existed on the margins of the map. This enduring motif is no accident. As art historian Dr. Linda Notchland has argued, aquatic settings in art consistently evoke themes of fluidity, mystery, and the sublime. Water is inherently formless and ever-changing, making it the perfect metaphor for the subconscious, for dreams, and for the unknown. A city built upon this element therefore becomes a symbol of humanity's attempt to impose order on chaos, to find stability in the midst of constant flux. This is brilliantly illustrated in the countless depictions of Venice during the Renaissance. Painters like Canaletto and Vita Carpaccio did not merely document the city's architecture, they celebrated its unique marriage of stone and water. The shimmering reflections of palaces in the canals, the bustling traffic of gondolas where other cities had carriages, the ever-present sense that the solid ground was just a temporary layer over a hidden, aqueous world. All of this made Venice a potent symbol of wealth, beauty, and precariousness. It was the one place in Europe where the mythical idea of a floating city was a tangible, working reality, and artists were captivated by its symbolic weight. Even in poetry, the image holds power. From Samuel Taylor Coleridge's Haunted Mariner on a Cursed Ship to the melancholic verses of those who live on houseboats today, water serves as a mirror for our inner states. The isolation of a floating structure can represent loneliness or it can represent peace. Its instability can signal danger or the thrilling potential for change and journey. This brings us to a crucial question about the interplay between art and history. How have these artistic and literary representations, in turn, shaped our perceptions of the real, historical floating cities we've discussed? The romantic, often sensationalized versions we see in films and books can create a filter of fantasy through which we view the past. We might imagine the crannog dwellers as mystical island people or the citizens of Tenochtitlan as inhabitants of an impossible paradise, because art has taught us to see these places as symbolic rather than practical. These creative interpretations, while often exaggerating the mystery, also perform a vital service. They keep the idea alive in our cultural consciousness, ensuring that the ingenuity and resilience of these real-world communities are not forgotten. They remind us that our relationship with water is not just one of engineering and survival, but one of deep psychological and spiritual significance. The floating city, in the end, is more than just history or architecture. It is a timeless symbol of our eternal desire to navigate the depths, both of the ocean and of ourselves. When we step back and view these floating cities not as isolated wonders but as a global phenomenon, a fascinating pattern emerges, one of both stunning convergence and remarkable divergence. It's like looking at a tapestry woven from different continents, where some threads are the same color but the patterns they create are entirely unique. Take, for example, two communities separated by an ocean and entirely unfamiliar with each other. The Uros people on Lake Titicaca in the high Andes and the various stilt village cultures of Borneo in Southeast Asia. On the surface, their solutions seem wildly different. The Uros build entire floating islands from bundled reeds, while the communities in Borneo construct towering longhouses on rigid wooden piles driven into riverbeds. Yet, if we look closer, the underlying principle is identical. Both use the most abundant, renewable material in their immediate environment to create a stable living platform that rises above the water. The Uros have the totora reed, the Borneo cultures have ironwood and bamboo. This speaks to a universal human instinct to look at the resources at hand and innovate a way to use them for survival and community. But the moment we move beyond materials, the differences become incredibly telling, and they are almost entirely dictated by geography and climate. As renowned archaeologist and climate scholar Dr. Brian Fagan has long argued, environmental pressures are the great sculptors of human civilization. In the arid high-altitude environment of the Andes, water is a precious, life-giving constant. The challenge for the Uros wasn't seasonal flooding, but rather harnessing the lake's bounty and surviving the harsh, thin air. Their entire existence is centered on the permanent presence of Lake Titicaca. Conversely, in the humid, tropical rainforests of Borneo, water is an ever-present force that can become a destructive deluge during monsoon seasons. The primary challenge there is not accessing water, but managing its overwhelming, periodic abundance. This is why the stilt houses of Borneo are built so high, to rise above the predictable, aggressive floodwaters, creating a dry living space while allowing the river to flow beneath them. The Uros technology is designed for buoyancy and renewal on a stable lake. The technology in Borneo is designed for elevation and resilience against a powerful, moving river. These environmental factors then ripple out to shape every other aspect of society, from the economy to the spiritual worldview. The Uros, living on a lake with limited connection to land, developed an economy almost exclusively based on lake resources, fishing for trout, hunting water birds, and more recently, tourism. Their isolation fostered a very inward-looking, self-contained culture with a spiritual focus on Mama Kota, the lake itself as a divine mother. In Borneo, the stilt villages are often located on rivers that function as aquatic highways deep into the rainforest. This positioned them not as isolated outposts, but as vital hubs in a regional trading network. Their economy became a mix of fishing, river-based trade, and harvesting forest products like rattan and timber. Their spiritual practices, therefore, are not focused on a single body of water, but often involve appeasing the spirits of the river, which are seen as capricious guardians of travel and commerce. The river is a road, not a home, and its spirits are treated with the respect and caution one would afford a powerful, unpredictable dignitary. We can see this pattern of environmental determinism play out across the globe. Contrast the floating chinampas of Tenochtitlan, which were essentially artificial islands created to expand a limited land area for agriculture in a lake basin, with the crannogs of Scotland, which were defensive fortifications built for protection in a landscape of rival clans. One was a tool of agricultural expansion in a politically centralized empire. The other was a tool of military defense in a politically fragmented society. The material wood and earth might be similar, but the purpose and the resulting social structure were worlds apart. Or consider the ancient marsh Arabs of Mesopotamia, who built elaborate reed houses on stable, man-made islands in a vast delta. Their complex society was able to form precisely because the marsh environment provided such a rich and reliable abundance of fish, waterfowl, and building materials, allowing for a degree of sedentary living and social stratification that might not have been possible in a harsher setting. So, does this mean there is no common thread, that each floating city is merely a product of its own unique circumstances? Not exactly. While the specific expressions are wildly diverse, a deeper, common aquatic ethos does seem to connect them all. It is an ethos of adaptability, of resilience, and of a profound understanding that humanity is not separate from nature but a participant within it. Whether it's the Uros patiently adding a new layer of reeds to their island, the Borneo builder selecting the perfect ironwood pile, or the Aztec engineer designing a dike, they all share a mindset of working with the water's properties, not against them. It is a philosophy that rejects the brute force domination of the landscape in favor of a more nuanced, symbiotic relationship. This unifying principle of intelligent adaptation is the true legacy of these aquatic civilizations. It shows us that while the environment presents the puzzle, human ingenuity, in all its diverse, brilliant, and culturally specific glory, provides the solution. Their stories are not just about building on water, they are a masterclass in reading the landscape and writing a human response directly onto its surface. While the grand canals and towering structures of these aquatic cities capture our imagination, the true, beating heart of these societies often pulsed with the work and wisdom of women, whose contributions have been historically overshadowed yet were absolutely fundamental to survival and success. In the floating gardens of Tenochtitlan, the Chinampas were far more than just feats of engineering. They were a realm of female expertise and management. The complex, labor-intensive process of cultivating these artificial islands, from sowing seeds to harvesting the abundant crops of maize, beans, and squash, was largely directed by women. Their deep, generational knowledge of crop rotation, water levels, and soil composition transformed these floating plots into the most productive agricultural system in the ancient world, directly fueling the empire's growth. This wasn't mere subsistence farming. It was a highly sophisticated form of agro-science that sustained an immense urban population, and it was overseen by women who understood the intricate language of the lake ecosystem. This pattern of female leadership in food production extended across the globe. In the stilt villages of Southeast Asia, women were not just participants but often the captains of the fishing economy. While men might venture further out on the lake, women frequently managed the intricate, stationary fish traps and weirs placed in the flooded forests, a technique requiring precise knowledge of seasonal fish migrations and water currents. They were also the primary processors and traders, expertly smoking, drying, and fermenting the catch to prevent spoilage in the humid climate, and then bartering these preserved goods at the floating markets. This control over a critical economic resource from harvest to market granted them significant influence within the household and the broader community, shaping social structures and decision-making in ways that challenged purely patriarchal models. The spiritual life of these water-based communities also frequently flowed through the hands of women. In the Uros culture of Lake Titicaca, the matriarchs of a family were not just homemakers, they were the keepers of tradition and ritual. They passed down the sacred stories of Mama Kota, the lake spirit, and performed small, daily offerings to ensure a good catch and protect their floating homes from storms. This spiritual role gave them a respected, authoritative voice in community matters. Even the haunting legend of Wise, often told as a simple morality tale about a sinful princess, can be reinterpreted through a gendered lens. Princess Dahat is typically vilified as the cause of the city's downfall, but her story can also be seen as a cautionary tale about a powerful, independent woman whose autonomy and sexuality were perceived as a threat to the established patriarchal and religious order, ultimately needing to be controlled and sacrificed to restore that order. Anthropologists like Dr. Silvia Escarcega argue that the very nature of the aquatic environment may have fostered these unique opportunities for female agency. Unlike land-based agrarian societies that often emphasized brute physical strength for plowing and defense, economies built on water required a different set of skills: meticulous knowledge, dexterity, patience, and a nuanced understanding of complex natural systems. These were domains where women's expertise was not just valued but essential. Furthermore, the spatial layout of these cities, with homes and workplaces often integrated and economic activities happening in communal, open areas like docks and markets, may have created a less rigid separation between domestic and public spheres, allowing for a more fluid and visible female presence in daily economic and social life. This perspective fundamentally transforms our understanding of these lost civilizations. They were not just marvels of engineering, but also fascinating social experiments. Their resilience was as much a product of their inclusive social structures and the full utilization of all their members' knowledge as it was of their wooden pilings and reed bundles. The lessons from these ancient societies resonate powerfully today. They demonstrate that gender equity is not a modern abstraction but a historical reality in many cultures, and one that was closely tied to both economic prosperity and environmental sustainability. When a society empowers all of its members to contribute their full knowledge and skills, it becomes more adaptive, more innovative, and far more resilient in the face of change. The floating cities stand as a testament to this profound truth, reminding us that the most enduring civilizations are those built not by half of their people, but by all of them. Ironically, the very force that erased so many ancient floating civilizations, rising water, is now compelling us to resurrect their wisdom. As climate change accelerates sea level rise and intensifies monsoon floods, the solid ground we once took for granted is becoming increasingly unstable. This global crisis has sparked a profound shift in architectural and urban planning, moving from a paradigm of resistance building higher seawalls and stronger levees to one of adaptation and graceful acceptance. Engineers and planners are now looking back thousands of years, not to outdated textbooks, but to living museums of resilience, realizing that the most innovative solutions for our aquatic future are rooted in our aquatic past. This return to traditional knowledge is most urgent in places on the front lines of climate change. In the low-lying river deltas of Bangladesh, annual monsoon floods are growing more severe and unpredictable, routinely submerging villages and destroying homes built on traditional foundations. In response, organizations like the NGO Shidhulai Swanavar Sangstha are not importing Western technology, but are instead reviving and adapting indigenous designs. They promote stilt houses constructed on sturdy pillars that allow floodwaters to flow harmlessly beneath the living quarters. This is not a new idea. It's a direct application of the principles used for centuries in Southeast Asian stilt villages, but now updated with modern materials like treated timber and concrete for greater durability. The success of these projects demonstrates a powerful truth, one championed by climate adaptation experts like Dr. Salimul Huq. He argues that effective resilience cannot be parachuted in from the outside. It must be a fusion of time-tested indigenous knowledge and cutting-edge modern science. Local communities already possess a deep, generational understanding of their environment, how the water moves, which materials work best, and how to live with seasonal flux. Combining this ancestral intelligence with modern engineering data, new materials, and climate modeling creates solutions that are not only structurally sound, but also culturally appropriate and readily adopted by the people who need them most. This hybrid approach is blossoming into inspiring innovations worldwide. In the Makoko community of Lagos, Nigeria, a bustling aquatic settlement where thousands live in stilt houses over a lagoon, a pioneering project emerged, the Makoko Floating School. Designed by architect Kunle Ademi, the triangular structure was a masterpiece of sustainable, context-driven design. Built from locally sourced wood and mounted on a platform made from over 250 recycled plastic barrels, it was a school that literally rose with the tide. It provided a stable, dry place for children to learn, even as the water level fluctuated beneath them, and incorporated solar panels to generate its own electricity. Though the original structure is no longer standing, its legacy is immense, serving as a prototype for floating infrastructure in coastal African cities and proving that functional community spaces can be built with the water, not in spite of it. Meanwhile, in the Netherlands, a nation that has spent centuries aggressively holding back the sea, a philosophical revolution is underway. Dutch engineers, led by innovators like Koen Olthuis of Water Studio, are pioneering a new form of architecture, not just floating but amphibious. In communities like Ijsberg and Maasbommel, homes are not built on fixed foundations but on hollow concrete boxes that rest on the ground under normal conditions. When the nearby river swells with floodwaters, these buoyant foundations lift the entire house, which floats securely up to 5 meters high, held in place by guideposts that prevent it from drifting away. Residents speak of a gentle, rocking sensation during a flood, a far cry from the devastating destruction faced by those in traditional, grounded homes. These projects are no longer small-scale experiments. They represent a mainstream shift in Dutch water management policy, moving from fighting the water to living with it in a dynamic, flexible partnership. The technological leap forward lies in how these modern projects enhance ancient principles. Where the Uros used totora reeds, modern floating communities might use fiberglass composites and expanded polystyrene foam for unparalleled buoyancy and longevity. Solar panels and aquatic turbines replace human and animal labor, creating self-sustaining energy systems. Closed-loop water recycling units treat and reuse wastewater on the spot, turning a floating neighborhood into its own independent utility system. These advancements make the concept more viable and scalable than ever before, but the core architectural philosophy remains identical to that of a Neolithic crannog or a Mesoamerican chinampa. Create a stable, secure, and sustainable living platform that uses the water's properties to its advantage. This brings us to a critical and complex question. With projections of hundreds of millions of climate refugees displaced by rising seas by the end of this century, could floating cities evolve from niche innovations into a widespread solution for mass migration? The idea is tantalizing. Entire new nations could be built on the high seas, offering sanctuary to those whose homelands have vanished beneath the waves. Organizations like the Seasteading Institute have proposed ambitious concepts for floating micronations, governed by their own laws and operating as independent entities. Yet, the ethical considerations are immense and fraught with difficulty. Who would have the right to live in these new aquatic cities? Would they become luxurious enclaves for the wealthy, while the poorest climate refugees are left in overcrowded, land-based camps? The issue of governance and legal jurisdiction is a labyrinthine challenge. Maritime law designed for ships is utterly unequipped to handle permanent, sovereign floating settlements. Would these cities be subject to the laws of the nearest coastal nation, or would they exist in a legal gray zone, potentially becoming havens for exploitation, crime, or unchecked environmental damage? The technological hurdles of building at scale are significant, but the political, economic, and ethical dilemmas are perhaps even greater. The history of floating cities teaches us that they are vulnerable to external forces and systemic collapse. As we look to this future, we must ask ourselves, not only can we build them, but how can we build them to be equitable, just, and truly resilient for all, not just a privileged few? The urgency is undeniable, and the past offers not just a blueprint for construction, but a cautionary tale about the societal foundations required to make any city, on land or water, truly float. Building a city on water has always been a profound economic calculation, a careful weighing of immense benefits against unique and persistent costs. The fundamental question for any society, ancient or modern, is not just can it be done, but does it make financial sense? The answer lies in a complex equation factoring in materials, labor, maintenance, and the sheer value of the location itself. In ancient Mesopotamia, the economic logic was compellingly straightforward. The primary building materials, reeds and mud, were not just inexpensive, they were freely available in the vast marshlands of the Tigris and Euphrates Delta. This eliminated the need for expensive quarrying, long-distance transport, or complex manufacturing. A family or community could harvest what they needed directly from their environment, creating a construction model with virtually zero material cost. This fostered a renewable, circular economy where structures could be easily repaired, expanded, or entirely rebuilt using the same abundant resources. However, this low initial investment came with a significant, ongoing price: the relentless battle against decay. Reed structures, constantly exposed to water and sun, required perpetual upkeep. The very affordability of the materials meant that the true cost was measured not in gold or silver, but in time and labor, a continuous communal investment to maintain their aquatic world against the inevitable forces of nature. This balance between initial outlay and long-term sustainability was deeply influenced by the underlying systems of ownership and investment. As development economist Dr. Hernando de Soto has profoundly argued, the formalization of property rights is a critical engine for economic development. In the context of floating cities, clear ownership of a home, a fishing ground, or a plot on a chinampa provided the security needed for individuals to invest their labor and resources into improving and maintaining their property. In the state-sponsored model of the Aztec Empire, the economic engine was different. The construction of Tenochtitlan's massive dikes, aqueducts, and chinampas was not a grassroots effort. It was a colossal public works project funded and organized by a powerful central state. The economic rationale was clear. A stable, productive capital city was essential for collecting tribute, projecting imperial power, and controlling a vast region. The Aztec state could marshal the labor of thousands of citizens and subjects, an investment that paid for itself many times over through the immense agricultural surplus and commercial taxes generated by the thriving metropolis. Conversely, in much earlier, smaller-scale societies like the Neolithic crannog builders, the economic model was purely communal. There was no state treasury or formal market. The currency was social capital and mutual obligation. Building and maintaining a crannog required the coordinated labor of the entire clan or village, an investment justified by the collective payoff of security, access to rich fishing grounds, and a defensible home. The economic viability was measured in survival and community cohesion, not in monetary profit. Translating these ancient economic models into the 21st century reveals a vastly more complex financial landscape. The dream of modern floating cities like Oceanix is no longer funded by tribute or communal labor, but by a mix of private venture capital, government grants, and philanthropic investment. The initial capital costs are undeniably staggering. While ancient builders used free, local reeds, modern projects require marine-grade steel, specially treated composites, corrosion-resistant concrete, and complex systems for water, power, and waste management. The engineering alone, ensuring these floating platforms can withstand storms and rising seas for decades, represents a monumental financial investment before a single person can move in. The funding mechanisms are equally complex. Would a floating neighborhood be financed like a real estate development, with units sold or leased to residents? Or would it function more like a municipal infrastructure project, funded by public bonds and taxes? The legal ambiguity over owning a plot of water further complicates financing. Banks are hesitant to issue mortgages for assets whose legal status is unclear. Maintenance, the eternal challenge, also takes on a new financial dimension. While the Euros simply added new reeds, a modern floating city would require teams of marine engineers, corrosion specialists, and utility workers, all commanding high salaries, making the long-term operational costs a serious and ongoing financial consideration. So, does this mean floating cities are destined to remain expensive novelties, exclusive enclaves for the wealthy? Not necessarily. The economic viability in our century may hinge on a fundamental shift in perspective. We must stop comparing the cost of building on water to the cost of building on cheap, available land, a comparison that floating cities will always lose. Instead, we must compare it to the skyrocketing cost of protecting coastal cities from the inevitable rise of the sea. The economic calculation changes dramatically when you consider the billions being spent on seawalls, levees, and pumping systems that are often only temporary solutions. A floating community, by design, adapts to sea level rise rather than fighting it. The initial investment could be justified as a long-term, permanent solution to coastal inundation, potentially saving trillions in future disaster relief, property loss, and failed infrastructure. Furthermore, the economic activity generated by a new floating district, the commerce, the tourism, the innovation hub it could become, adds another layer of value to the equation. The question of economic viability, therefore, is not just about accounting sheets. It is about a choice between continuing to pour money into a desperate, losing battle against the ocean, or making a strategic investment in a new form of urbanism that accepts water as a partner. The ancient models show us that with the right resources and a clear economic purpose, building on water is not just possible, it can be the most rational choice for survival and prosperity. The challenge for our time is to create the financial and legal innovations that can turn this ancient logic into a sustainable modern reality. For all the incredible history we can reconstruct, the world of aquatic civilizations still holds onto secrets that stubbornly refuse to give up their answers, drawing us into a realm where hard evidence blurs with tantalizing possibility. Perhaps no site embodies this mystery more completely than Nan Madol, a haunting, abandoned city built not on an island, but across nearly 100 artificial islets in the shallow waters off the coast of Pohnpei in Micronesia. The name itself means "in the space between," a perfectly apt description for a place that seems to exist between the physical world and the realm of legend. The scale is staggering. For centuries, builders moved colossal hexagonal columns of basalt rock, each weighing many tons, across the water to construct a network of canals, walls, and tombs that cover over 2 square kilometers. The local oral history speaks of powerful sorcerers who used magic to levitate these stones into place, a poetic explanation for a feat that seems to defy logical understanding even today. How did a society without pulleys, metal tools, or draft animals quarry, transport, and precisely stack an estimated 250 million tons of stone? The prevailing archaeological theory suggests a painstaking process of raft building and levering, a monumental communal effort that would have required generations of backbreaking labor and a social organization far more complex than previously thought for the region. Yet, the logistical challenges are so immense that this explanation still feels incomplete to many, leaving the door open for speculation and wonder about lost techniques or knowledge we simply cannot yet grasp. This sense of profound mystery extends far beyond the Pacific to the crystal-clear waters off the southern coast of Japan's Yonaguni Island. Here, in the late 1980s, a diver discovered a series of breathtaking underwater formations that look for all the world like a sunken city. We see what appear to be massive terraced platforms, staircases with sharp 90-degree angles, and structures that resemble grand plazas and even a monolithic pyramid, all resting under about 80 feet of water. The immediate, thrilling assumption was that this was the remains of a lost Pacific civilization, a real-life Atlantis swallowed by the sea at the end of the last ice age. This interpretation has been passionately championed by some researchers, including geologist Dr. Robert Schoch, who, while initially skeptical, came to believe that the structures show clear evidence of human modification, particularly on the upper sections, that cannot be entirely explained by natural forces. He posits that we might be looking at a natural rock formation that was later quarried and shaped by ancient humans when it was still above water, a sacred site that was gradually submerged as sea levels rose. However, the scientific community remains deeply divided. Mainstream geology offers a powerful counter-argument that the Yonaguni Monument is a spectacular but entirely natural formation. They point to the region's unique sandstone, which fractures along sharp horizontal and vertical planes due to intense tectonic activity. The powerful underwater currents of the area have then eroded this stone over millennia, sculpting the blocks and steps through entirely natural processes of weathering and erosion. The human brain is uniquely wired to seek out patterns and familiar shapes, a phenomenon called pareidolia, where we see faces in clouds or animals in rock formations. It is possible that we are projecting the idea of a city onto a masterpiece of natural geology. This debate between the natural and the artificial is what makes Yonaguni so endlessly captivating. It represents a true scientific frontier, a puzzle on the seafloor that challenges our ability to distinguish the hand of nature from the hand of humankind. The powerful allure of these places lies in this very ambiguity. They tap into a deep, almost primal human desire to discover evidence of a forgotten chapter in our story, a sophisticated past that predates our current understanding. The idea of an advanced prehistoric civilization, whether it's Plato's Atlantis or a hypothetical Pacific culture, is a powerful narrative. It suggests that knowledge can be lost and found, that history is not a simple linear progression, and that there may be profound wisdom from our ancestors waiting to be rediscovered beneath the waves. This captivation isn't just for the public. It drives serious researchers to continue probing these sites with ever more sophisticated tools. New technologies are finally providing ways to move beyond speculation. High-resolution underwater LiDAR can map these submerged sites in exquisite detail, revealing patterns invisible to the naked eye. Advances in sonar technology can penetrate layers of sediment to see what lies beneath. Genetic analysis of soil samples from places like Nan Madol could potentially reveal traces of ancient plant life or human activity that provide clues about its construction and use. Each technological leap offers a new chance to peel back a layer of the mystery, to replace legend with data. So what secrets might still be hiding in the unexplored depths of our oceans? The possibilities are as vast as the sea itself. We have mapped the surface of Mars in greater detail than our own ocean floor. It is statistically near certain that countless archaeological sites, from sunken coastal villages to entire cities that slipped beneath the waves during periods of rapid sea level rise, are waiting to be found. These wouldn't necessarily be the stuff of fantasy, but the very real, preserved remains of the cultures we've discussed throughout this video, the precursors to the crannogs, the early versions of the stilt villages, the trading posts that were lost to a great storm. Each discovery has the potential to rewrite a paragraph, a page, or even an entire chapter of human history. the enduring enigma of sites like Nan Madol and Yonaguni is a gift. It reminds us that our planet still holds deep mysteries and that the spirit of exploration is as vital today as it ever was. It invites all of us to remain curious, to question the established narratives, and to wonder what incredible stories are still lying silent, waiting for the currents to shift and reveal their truths. But beyond the economics and engineering, the very experience of living on water touches something deep within the human psyche, shaping our emotions, our creativity, and our deepest fears in ways that solid ground simply does not. Imagine waking up every morning to the gentle, rocking motion of your home, the sound of waves lapping against the foundation, a constant, soothing soundtrack to your life. For many who choose this existence, that connection to the rhythmic pulse of the water fosters a profound sense of freedom and tranquility. Environmental psychologists have a term for this: biophilia, the innate human tendency to seek connections with nature and other forms of life. Dr. Judith Heerwagen, a pioneer in this field, has documented how environments with water features are consistently rated higher in preference and are associated with lower stress levels and higher cognitive performance. The ever-changing vista of the water, the play of light on its surface, and the direct access to the natural world seem to act as a balm for the modern mind, offering a respite from the rigid, often overwhelming stimuli of urban land-based life. This isn't just a feeling, it's a physiological response. The sight and sound of water can actually trigger a meditative state, lowering cortisol levels and allowing for a more open, fluid state of thought that is highly conducive to creativity and problem-solving. Yet this idyllic picture is only one side of the coin. The very elements that provide peace can also be a source of deep-seated anxiety and psychological strain. That same gentle rocking that lulls you to sleep can, during a storm, transform into a terrifying, nauseating pitch that reminds you of your utter vulnerability. The constant, low-grade hum of anxiety that comes from knowing your safety is tethered to the whims of the weather is a reality for many in floating communities. The threat of disaster is not an abstract concept, it is a visceral presence. In the floating villages of Cambodia's Tonle Sap, residents speak of a dual consciousness, a deep love for their way of life intertwined with a respectful fear of the water's power. During the monsoon season, the anxiety is palpable as families secure their homes, move their belongings to higher shelves, and prepare for the possibility of having to evacuate quickly. This psychological burden is a form of continuous, low-level stress that can take a toll over a lifetime, a stark reminder that living in harmony with nature does not mean living without risk. This duality is not a new phenomenon. We can infer its echoes from the artifacts and myths of ancient aquatic civilizations. The very existence of elaborate rituals and offerings to water deities, from the spirits of Lake Titicaca to the legends of vengeful sea gods like the one that destroyed Wise, points to a deep-seated human need to manage the psychological terror of the unknown. These stories and ceremonies were a way for our ancestors to codify their fears, to create a narrative of control in a fundamentally unpredictable environment. An archaeologist uncovering an amulet meant to protect a fisherman or a ceremonial dagger thrown into a lake as an offering is seeing the physical manifestation of ancient anxiety, a testament to the universal human desire to soothe the psyche in the face of nature's immense power. The cultural narratives that emerged from these communities often reflect this tension, celebrating the bounty and beauty of the water while also warning of its capricious and destructive potential. The social fabric of these communities is also uniquely shaped by their environment. The isolation of living on a floating platform or an artificial island can foster an incredibly strong, interdependent community bond. Everyone relies on their neighbors for safety, for sharing resources during tough times, and for the collective labor of maintenance. This creates a powerful sense of belonging and mutual obligation that is often missing in anonymous, land-based cities. However, this same isolation can also lead to feelings of being trapped or disconnected from the wider world, potentially exacerbating social tensions within the close-knit group. There's a certain psychological fortitude required to thrive in such a setting, a self-reliance and resilience that becomes woven into the cultural identity. For future floating cities, these historical and modern psychological insights are not trivial. They are absolutely critical to their success. A technologically perfect floating district that ignores the human need for both security and stimulation, for both community and privacy, is destined to fail. The design must incorporate safe, solid gathering spaces to alleviate the stress of constant motion. It must create visual and physical connections to the water that inspire and calm, while also providing robust psychological assurances against storms and flooding. The lesson from those who have lived on water for generations is clear. The human spirit can float, but it needs both the thrill of the horizon and the security of a well-anchored home to truly thrive. Building a city on water solves one set of problems only to introduce an entirely new and profoundly complex web of legal and political challenges. The fundamental question is as simple as it is difficult to answer: who makes the rules when your foundation is the high seas? For centuries, the world's legal systems have been built on a bedrock assumption, literally. Laws are written to govern territory, and territory has historically meant land with fixed, recognized borders. A floating city exists in a legal gray zone, a liminal space between the clear-cut jurisdictions of sovereign nations. This ambiguity was, for many historical aquatic communities, their greatest asset. Consider the legendary pirate haven of Libertalia, a supposed utopian colony founded by pirates off the coast of Madagascar in the 17th century. While its historical existence is debated, the legend itself is powerfully instructive. It represented the ultimate escape from the laws of any land-based empire, a place where those who rejected the authority of European kings could create their own rules and their own society on the neutral territory of the ocean. This dream of autonomy, of escaping the overreach of a distant government, is a thread that runs directly into the modern seasteading movement. Today, that same desire for autonomy and innovation is crashing headlong into the rigid frameworks of international law. The primary document governing the world's oceans is the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea, often called the Constitution for the Oceans. It was a monumental achievement in diplomacy, but it was drafted long before the concept of permanent floating settlements was a practical reality. The convention meticulously divides the ocean into zones of control. A nation's territorial waters extend 12 nautical miles from its shore, where it enjoys near total sovereignty. Beyond that lies the contiguous zone, and further out, the exclusive economic zone, which stretches 200 nautical miles, giving a coastal state rights over resources like fish and oil, but not total control over the water column itself. Then there is the high seas, the area beyond any national jurisdiction, often called the common heritage of mankind. This is the supposed frontier for floating cities seeking true independence. However, as legal scholar Dr. Elizabeth Mendenhall explains, the convention offers no clear pathway for how a floating city could establish itself as a sovereign entity on the high seas. The law is designed for ships, which are vessels that move and are registered to a flag state, and for fixed structures like oil platforms, which are considered installations under the jurisdiction of the coastal state that built them. A permanent, inhabited, floating city fits neatly into neither category, creating a regulatory black hole. This legal vacuum is where the modern seasteading movement has attempted to plant its flag, with famously turbulent results. The most prominent case study is the story of the Seasteading Institute and its ambitious plan to launch a floating community in French Polynesia. This was not a wild-eyed plan for the high seas, but a pragmatic attempt to partner with a host nation. The initial idea was compelling. The floating city would operate with significant autonomy, functioning as a special economic zone where innovators could experiment with new forms of governance, medicine, and technology free from stifling regulations. In return, French Polynesia would gain a cutting-edge project to bolster its economy and help it adapt to rising sea levels. For a time, it seemed like a perfect symbiotic relationship. Memorandums of understanding were signed and feasibility studies were conducted, but the project ultimately foundered on the sharp rocks of political reality. Local opposition grew, fueled by concerns about neocolonialism, environmental impact, and a fear that the project would primarily benefit wealthy foreign entrepreneurs rather than the local population. The government changed and the political will evaporated. The project was officially abandoned in 2018, a stark lesson in the immense difficulty of navigating not just the ocean, but the even more treacherous waters of international politics and local consent. The hurdles are not just political, they are profoundly practical. Imagine the day-to-day complexities of a floating community. Which nation's laws govern marriage, property disputes, or criminal justice? How would taxes be collected? And who would provide essential services like waste management or search and rescue operations? Without a recognized sovereign state to issue passports, what would be the citizenship status of the residents? They could become stateless, unable to travel or access consular services abroad. Furthermore, the specter of becoming a lawless haven is very real. The same autonomy that attracts libertarian innovators could also attract money launderers, tax evaders, and other actors seeking to operate beyond the reach of any law enforcement agency. The international community has a strong interest in preventing the ocean from becoming a new Wild West, and any floating city that appears to threaten this stability would face immense pressure and potentially even naval enforcement from established nations. This brings us to the central, thorny question this entire dilemma poses. In a world where the oceans are a shared resource, how can a floating community possibly balance its desire for radical autonomy with the practical necessity of integrating into the global system of trade, diplomacy, and law? Complete independence seems like a fantasy. No community is truly an island, even if it is built on one. It would need to trade for resources, its residents would need to travel, and it would need recognition to participate in the global economy. The most plausible future for floating urbanism may not look like a sovereign nation, but rather like a highly autonomous municipality with a special status granted by a host nation, similar to the relationship between Hong Kong and China. The host nation provides the legal umbrella and international standing, while the floating city manages its own internal affairs with a unique set of laws designed for its specific environment and goals. This is not the dream of pure freedom that inspired the pirates of Libertalia, but it is a compromise that acknowledges a fundamental truth of the modern world. Innovation rarely happens in a vacuum. True progress in building on the water will require not just brilliant engineers, but savvy diplomats, thoughtful legal scholars, and a deep respect for the complex, interconnected system of global governance that has, for better or worse, kept the peace on the oceans for decades. The political challenge, it turns out, may be far more daunting than the engineering one. The hunt for these lost worlds is no longer limited to divers with trowels and brushes. We are now entering a golden age of discovery. powered by a suite of technologies that feel like they've been pulled from science fiction. This revolution is fundamentally changing the game, allowing archaeologists to explore vast underwater landscapes with a precision and scale that was unimaginable just a generation ago, all without ever disturbing a single grain of sediment. At the forefront of this change are autonomous underwater vehicles, or sleek robotic subs that glide silently through the depths pre-programmed with their mission. Equipped with high-resolution multi-beam sonar and advanced magnetometers, these drones can map the seafloor in stunning detail, creating three-dimensional images that reveal anomalies and structures hidden beneath layers of sand and time. They are the silent surveyors of the deep, covering enormous areas where human divers would need years, all while transmitting their data back to researchers sitting comfortably on a ship far above. This is how projects like the Black Sea Maritime Archaeology Project, led by experts like Professor John Adams, made their incredible discoveries. The anoxic, oxygen-free waters of the Black Sea's depths act as a perfect time capsule, preserving organic materials like wooden ship hulls and tools for thousands of years in a state of near perfection. Their robotic explorers have uncovered over 60 shipwrecks from various eras, from intact Ottoman vessels to Byzantine trading ships, each one a frozen moment in maritime history that completely rewrites our understanding of ancient shipbuilding and trade routes. The technological toolbox doesn't stop there. For mapping submerged landscapes in shallower coastal waters, where many of the most promising sites for lost settlements are likely to be found, LiDAR has become an indispensable asset. Mounted on aircraft or drones, LiDAR, which stands for light detection and ranging, works by firing millions of laser pulses at the ground. By measuring the time it takes for each pulse to bounce back, it can create a fantastically detailed digital elevation model, effectively digitally stripping away the water to reveal the topography of the seafloor beneath. This is how researchers are identifying the ghostly outlines of river channels that were dry land during the last ice age, potential locations where prehistoric communities might have lived before being inundated by rising seas. It allows us to see the lost geography that would have attracted human settlement, giving us a brand new map to guide our search. Perhaps one of the most mind-bending new techniques involves not looking for structures at all, but instead analyzing the very dirt itself. Scientists can now extract ancient environmental DNA, or eDNA, from core samples of underwater sediment. This mud contains a microscopic archive of everything that lived and died in that location: fish scales, plant pollen, animal hair, and even the genetic traces of human bacteria. By sequencing this DNA, researchers can reconstruct the entire ecosystem of a site thousands of years ago. They can tell if people were farming nearby, what crops they were growing, what animals they were raising, and what the local environment was like. It's a form of time travel that allows us to smell the air and see the landscape of a place that hasn't been above water for millennia, providing indirect but powerful evidence of human activity, even if all physical structures have long since vanished. The pace of this technological advancement is so rapid that leading maritime archaeologists like Dr. Brendan Foley confidently predict we are on the cusp of a new era of discovery. He believes that within the next few decades, the combination of these tools will lead us to not just a handful of new sites, but potentially dozens of unknown aquatic settlements, from sunken villages off ancient coastlines to more sophisticated floating communities that have left only the faintest of traces. We are moving from a process of painstaking, blind searching to one of targeted, intelligent investigation. AI algorithms can now be trained to scan the immense datasets collected by sonar and LiDAR, automatically flagging potential man-made shapes and patterns that a human eye might miss in terabytes of information. This isn't just about finding more stuff, it's about rewriting history. Every new discovery has the potential to challenge our timelines, shift our understanding of trade networks, and introduce us to entirely new cultures that thrived at the water's edge but were lost to the waves. Yet with this incredible power to uncover comes a profound and complex set of ethical questions that the archaeological community is only beginning to grapple with. The very act of discovery, especially with non-invasive tools, creates an immediate obligation. Who has the right to these stories? If a robotic sub maps a perfectly preserved sunken settlement in international waters, who decides if it should be excavated, how it should be studied, and where the artifact should ultimately reside? The traditional model of finders-keepers, often tied to national institutions, feels increasingly outdated and can echo a colonial past where cultural heritage was extracted from its context. For sites that are clearly linked to living indigenous communities, the ethical path is one of partnership and consent from the very beginning. This means involving descendant communities in the research design, respecting their knowledge and traditions, and sometimes agreeing that a site should be documented but left completely undisturbed, as it may hold the remains of ancestors or be considered sacred ground. The technology also raises questions about preservation versus access. Publicly releasing precise coordinates of a pristine shipwreck can lead to it being looted by treasure hunters or damaged by curious divers before proper scientific study can begin. There is a delicate balance between sharing the excitement of discovery with the world and protecting these fragile, non-renewable resources. This new frontier is not just about the technology of finding. It is about developing a new ethics of stewardship, one that recognizes these submerged sites not as troves to be plundered, but as fragile pages of our shared human story that deserve to be read with care, respect, and a deep sense of responsibility for generations to come. But the most profound innovations often emerge not from a blank slate, but from a deep and respectful dialogue with the past. As we face down the monumental challenges of climate change and rising seas, a critical source of solutions is being rediscovered not in futuristic labs, but in the timeless wisdom of the very communities who have thrived on water for generations. This isn't about nostalgia. It's a practical and urgent acknowledgement that indigenous knowledge systems hold the key to a more resilient and sustainable future. These practices are not primitive. They are the product of millennia of iterative experimentation, of observing the subtle language of the environment and learning to adapt in harmony with it. The Uros people's mastery of the totora reed is a perfect example. This humble plant is not just a building block. It is a completely renewable, biodegradable, and locally abundant material that forms the foundation for their entire world. When a Uros home or boat has served its purpose, it simply returns to the earth and the water without a trace of pollution, a stunning model of a circular, waste-free economy that stands in direct opposition to our modern reliance on concrete, steel, and plastic. Similarly, the stilt villages of Southeast Asia offer a masterclass in flood resilience that modern engineers are only now beginning to fully appreciate. Their designs aren't based on complex hydrological models, but on generations of lived experience with monsoon seasons. The height of the poles, the flexibility of the bamboo joints, the orientation of the houses to withstand prevailing winds. These are all calculated decisions refined over centuries, providing a blueprint for how to live with water rather than in constant fear of it. This movement towards collaborative design is already yielding powerful results around the globe. In the Amazon rainforest, architects and engineers are partnering with indigenous communities to design schools and community centers that blend modern techniques with ancestral knowledge. These structures often feature elevated foundations inspired by traditional stilt designs to handle seasonal flooding, natural ventilation systems learned from centuries of living in a humid climate, and roofing made from locally sourced sustainable materials. The outcome is not just a building that is more efficient and comfortable. It is architecture that is deeply rooted in its place, both culturally and environmentally. It demonstrates a fusion of intellects where a structural engineer's understanding of load-bearing calculations meets a community elder's intuitive knowledge of wind patterns and river behavior. This collaborative model ensures that the solutions are not just imposed from the outside, but are co-created, making them more likely to be adopted, maintained, and cherished by the community they are meant to serve. However, this necessary and promising approach is fraught with ethical peril, and the line between respectful collaboration and outright cultural appropriation is a fine one that must be navigated with care. The danger lies in extracting the technical knowledge while discarding the cultural context and the people who created it. It is the difference between a major corporation patenting a design based on indigenous techniques and profiting from it without any benefit or recognition returning to the source community, versus a project that actively involves that community as partners and shareholders from the very beginning. Scholars like Dr. Kyle White, a professor and member of the Potawatomi Nation, forcefully argue that this is not just an ethical imperative but a practical one. Indigenous knowledge is not a static set of data points to be mined. It is a living, evolving system of understanding that is deeply tied to language, spirituality, and a specific relationship to place. To truly learn from it requires building relationships based on trust, reciprocity, and justice. It means acknowledging past harms and ensuring that the benefits of this new innovation, be they economic, social, or political, are shared equitably. This brings us to the most crucial question of all. As the world looks to the wisdom of floating cities past for solutions to our impending crisis, how do we ensure that this revival doesn't become another form of exploitation, but instead actively benefits the descendants of the original builders? The answer must go beyond token consultation. It requires a fundamental shift in how we approach innovation itself. It means establishing clear legal frameworks for intellectual property that recognize and protect traditional knowledge. It means creating partnerships where indigenous communities are not just informants but are co-leaders, co-designers, and equitable owners in any projects or companies that commercialize these ideas. It means investing in the education and infrastructure of these communities first, ensuring they have the resources to thrive on their own terms. The goal cannot be to simply take their designs and leave them behind. The true, sustainable model is to honor the entire system, the people, the culture, and the knowledge, recognizing that the most resilient future is one built not on extraction, but on inclusion and deep mutual respect. Yet beyond the practical and economic forces that drove the construction of these cities lies a far deeper, more universal current, a profound symbolic relationship between humanity and water that is etched into our very psyche. To understand why we have always been drawn to build upon the waves, we must first recognize that water is far more than a physical resource. It is the most powerful and enduring symbol in the human imagination, a source of life, a boundary between worlds, and a mirror for our own emotions. From the very beginning of civilization, our greatest stories and spiritual systems have flowed from its banks. The ancient Egyptians did not merely depend on the Nile for irrigation. They saw it as a divine reflection of the heavenly river that flowed through the underworld, a cyclical promise of death and rebirth made manifest in the annual flood that nourished their fields. In Hinduism, the Ganges is not just a river but a goddess, Ganga Ma, who descended from heaven to purify the earth, and to bathe in her waters is to wash away a lifetime of sin. This sacred connection transforms a simple act of hygiene into a profound spiritual ritual, embedding the physical environment into the very core of cultural identity. This symbolic power of water to represent both creation and chaos is a thread that runs through global mythology. In the Babylonian creation epic, the Enuma Elish, the world is formed from the body of the saltwater goddess Tiamat, who represents the primordial, chaotic ocean. The god Marduk must slay her to impose order upon the universe, using one half of her body to form the sky and the other to form the earth. Here, water is the raw, untamed stuff of existence itself, which must be conquered and shaped to create the world we know. Similarly, in the biblical book of Genesis, the Spirit of God moves over the face of the deep, the formless void of waters, before speaking light and order into being. This dual nature of water, as both the source of all life and a terrifying, chaotic force, is why it holds such a potent grip on our collective consciousness. It gives life, but it can also take it away in an instant through flood, storm, or drought. It is this inherent duality that the French philosopher Gaston Bachelard explored in his seminal work, Water and Dreams. He delved into what he called the material imagination, arguing that water is not a neutral element but one that actively shapes our dreams, our poetry, and our deepest fears. It is a symbol of purity and reflection, but also of the subconscious, the hidden, and the unknown depths within ourselves. When we view the floating cities we have explored through this lens, they are transformed. They become more than just ingenious feats of engineering or strategic economic hubs. They are profound physical expressions of these deep-seated human dreams and fears. The Aztecs building their majestic Tenochtitlan on a lake were not just seeking defensive advantage. They were fulfilling a prophetic vision, a divine mandate to build where an eagle perched on a cactus with a snake in its beak. Their city was a symbolic act of placing their civilization at the very center of the cosmic order, on the interface between the earthly and the divine, represented by the water. The Uros people on Lake Titicaca, by constructing their entire world from the reeds that grow in the sacred lake, were engaging in a continuous act of communion with Mama Kota, the mother water deity. Their floating existence was a prayer, a way of living so intimately within the sacred that their homes and their god were one and the same. Even the tragic legend of Wise is not just a tale of a sunken city. It is a powerful moral and psychological allegory. The water that destroys the city is not a random natural disaster, but a manifestation of divine punishment for human hubris and moral decay. The sea becomes a symbol of a moral order that cannot be flouted, a force of nature that ultimately enforces a spiritual balance. This symbolic relationship is not a relic of the past. It persists with urgent relevance today as we confront a global water crisis and the climate-fueled upheaval of our oceans. Our modern language is still saturated with aquatic metaphors that reveal our deepest anxieties and aspirations. We speak of being emotionally overwhelmed, drowning in work, or feeling adrift. We seek a sea change or hope to get our heads above water. These are not just turns of phrase. They are evidence of how deeply the symbolism of water is wired into our understanding of our own lives. As sea levels rise and megastorms become more frequent, the ancient fear of the deluge has returned with a vengeance, making the symbolic power of water more immediate and terrifying than ever. In this context, the revival of interest in floating architecture is deeply symbolic in itself. It represents a profound shift in our relationship with water, from one of control and domination, where we built higher walls to hold it back, to one of adaptation and acceptance, where we learn to move with it. A modern floating house is not just a smart piece of engineering. It is a physical declaration that we are ready to surrender our illusion of absolute control and enter into a new, more humble and harmonious relationship with this elemental force. This brings our journey to a final, unifying thought. The story of humanity's floating cities, from the ancient crannogs to the prototypes of today, is ultimately about our eternal dance with water. It is a dance of awe and reverence, of ingenuity and adaptation, of fear and respect. We are drawn to the water not just for what it gives us, but for what it means to us. It is the mirror in which we see our own power and our own fragility reflected back at us. The floating city is the ultimate symbol of this dance, a place where we have chosen to step onto the dance floor itself, to embrace the rhythm of the waves, and to build our dreams upon the very thing that both sustains and threatens us. It is a testament to our belief that we can find a way to live within the mystery, to build our homes not just on solid ground, but on hope, on ingenuity, and on a profound, enduring faith in the possibility of balance. As we surface from the depths of history, the stories of these floating cities offer us far more than a glimpse into the past. They provide a vital blueprint for our future. We've journeyed from the primordial crannogs of Scotland to the breathtaking canals of Tenochtitlan, from the resilient stilt villages of Southeast Asia to the sacred reed islands of Lake Titicaca. Each of these civilizations, in its own unique way, mastered the art of living with water, not against it. They didn't see the ocean, the lake, or the river as an obstacle to be conquered, but as a partner to be understood, a resource to be cherished, and a foundation upon which to build a thriving community. Their ingenuity whispers to us across the centuries, reminding us that human creativity is our most powerful tool for adaptation. They teach us that the greatest innovations are often those that work in harmony with the natural world, leveraging its rhythms and resources to create something both beautiful and enduring. The Chinampa farmers, the reed island weavers, the stilt house builders, they were all ecologists and engineers long before those terms even existed, embodying a sustainable ethos that we are only now, in the face of a climate crisis, beginning to desperately relearn. The lessons they offer are not locked in history books, they are urgently relevant today, as our own cities grapple with rising sea levels, devastating floods, and the pressing need for sustainable design. The wisdom of these ancient aquatic architects lights a path forward. Their work shows us that resilience isn't about building higher walls to keep the water out, but about designing flexible, dynamic structures that can rise and fall with the tide. It challenges us to move beyond the rigid concrete and steel of the 20th century and embrace a new, more fluid form of urbanism, one that is circular, adaptive, and deeply respectful of the ecosystems we depend on. The past is not a place to escape from, but a vast library of proven solutions waiting to be rediscovered and reimagined with our modern tools. By blending their time-tested principles with our contemporary technology, we can build a future that is not only more resilient to the changes ahead, but also more imaginative, more equitable, and more in tune with the planet we call home. This is the true legacy of the cities that floated, a testament to human potential and a powerful call to action, urging us to harness our own creativity and courage to meet the great challenges of our time. Thank you so much for diving deep into this exploration with me. If these stories of innovation on the water captivated your imagination, please give this video a like and subscribe to the channel for more journeys into history's greatest mysteries. I would absolutely love to hear which of these floating cities resonated most with you. Was it the majestic Aztec capital, the timeless stilt villages, or the mysterious legend of Wise? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below, and until next